I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
And a very warm welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. With you, of course, a little earlier today because we have all eyes on Westminster. Not just Prime Minister's questions coming up in about 10 minutes' time, but President Zelenskyy to address Parliament on his first visit to the UK. Well, the Ukrainian leader here in Downing Street a little earlier, making this surprise visit a year on, of course, from the Russian invasion. So meeting Rishi Sunak for talks at number 10, and then we're told he will be later meeting the King at Buckingham Palace, and then seeing at first hand the tanks and armour that Britain is sending to aid his country's defence. It's quite a shopping list that Rishi Sunak has promised him, including those tanks, the Challenger 2, self-propelled guns, and 3 million rounds of ammunition. So we'll be reflecting on that. Meanwhile, the political battle rages on at Westminster too. The Prime Minister reshuffling his cabinet and reorganising Whitehall, all in a bid to refresh his party's image as it still free falls in the polls. New party chairman Greg Hands warning they face difficult times, something Sir Keir Starmer likely to focus on shortly. We'll have all that live for you here on GB News Live. Well, joining us for Prime Minister's questions and, of course, the Zelenskyy address is Labour MP for Brent North, Barry Gardiner, and then political commentator and journalist Benedict Spence will be joining us as well. But, Barry, thank you for coming in, because I know you'd have liked to have booked your seat in. Just to explain a bit, Westminster Hall is where President Zelenskyy will be addressing it.
Yes, Westminster Hall is the most historic political building in the country, actually. It's dates from 1099. And it's actually the only place in the Palace of Westminster that can hold both all the members of the House of Commons and all the members of the House of Lords. So that's where it's going to be. It's actually where, of course, Her Majesty, the Queen, the late Queen, was lying in state.
Indeed, and we saw everyone trooping through it. And we expect a packed house for this Zelenskyy address. He's already obviously talking to the Prime Minister at number 10, and now we're told we will meet the King as well. The significance being it is a year on since the invasion happened, and we're looking at what may be outlined in more detail later, a pretty substantial shopping list of armaments that we're providing to Ukraine.
Yes, it is. We've already provided 2.3 billion worth of support, and it's reckoned that that will be duplicated again in the
latest
year.
Pictures here inside number 10 with the handshake, obligatory handshake.
Yeah. Yes, it's. I think what we're going to see is not just the importance of the package in terms of the hardware. It's also the training that's going to happen for the Ukrainian pilots, and they're of course going to be training on NATO jets and getting used to that. So I think that is probably just as significant, actually.
Yeah, and indication perhaps that this no that we had from Biden in terms of providing the aircraft may soften as, of course, NATO, I think Poland's got F-16s, I think Romania's got F-16s, and even though we've got more advanced jets, clearly doing it under the NATO umbrella means that things can move on.
That's right. We haven't yet taken the step of supplying those aircraft, but yes, watch this space, I think, is the message.
Yeah, well, Benedict has arrived as well, so welcome to you. And we're just getting a little bit of detail about what President Zelenskyy was saying there in number 10, thanking Britain for its big support from the first days of full-scale invasion. And obviously, it's not just about the hardware. I guess it's the political message it's sending to other NATO leaders and, of course, to the Kremlin.
It is. And, I mean, equally, that's about putting pressure on places like the United States and Germany as well, you know, because, of course, there is a lot of division in both of those countries about whether or not certain things should be sent. And actually, I think Britain's taking a leading role.
We've got the motorcade. Sorry, Benny, just to butt in, that these are the live pictures now as they're heading towards the Palace of Westminster. And, of course, obviously the security detail as well, because no doubt the special branch and all the other officers of state will be very anxious to make sure this is a safe visit.
Quite. I mean, it's also, I think this whole episode has highlighted Britain's potential future role as a bridging partner between different parts of NATO, because as much as you have some European countries who have been very reluctant to get too heavily involved ahead of time in the conflict, you've also had other countries like Poland, like the Czech Republic, like the Slovakians, who have been very keen to push ahead. And I think Britain has played quite a good role as the sort of the balancing act between those quite hawkish countries and perhaps places like the United States, where you have a very sort of dovish approach to Russia with the Republican Party, of course.
Down Biden's neck,
of course, and as we all know, we regularly talk about Germany being very reluctant to get itself drawn into what it sees as another existential conflict with Russia.
They supplied the Leopard tanks eventually. Just on what Barry was saying about the training of the pilots, do you think, again, this is a little bit of a political nudge with us actually saying that we're going to start training these Ukrainian pilots on these advanced NATO fighters?
I think it is very much a nudge. I also think it's actually something of a PR exercise in a way, because I think the importance of aircraft in this conflict are very slightly overstated, actually, because Russia's key strength actually is knocking down people's aircraft and knocking out air bases. Its entire military strategy is based around a war with NATO, and what is NATO's great strength? It is air superiority. So this is not so much about saying we're going to give them these game-changing weapons. actually what game-changing weapons would be is long-distance ballistics. And of course, we all know that the Germans and the Republicans are saying, well, you can't launch attacks at Russia.
The Kremlin would see that as an offensive.
Well, that's the argument. But the planes, I think, are much more a sort of a PR exercise to say this is the extent to which we are prepared to back you. We will get these very expensive pieces of kit to you.
It looks as if President Zelenskyy will be there in time for, we're getting very excited here, for Prime Minister's questions. Yeah. Will it alter the nature of the adversarial across a dispatch box in that Sir Keir Starmer will know that there's someone in the public gallery watching? Are they all going to be on their best behaviour today?
Look, I think that's right. But I also think it's as it should be. I think we would do a lot...
the Mother of Parliament on show for the world.
Indeed. And we have to... Every week I would like to see us take a statesman-like approach at Prime Minister's questions. Doesn't always happen, as you well know.
As we might find out shortly.
Well, I hope not. I hope that this week both sides will say, look, we are on show to the world. Yeah. There are big global issues. If we look as if we're playing petty domestic politics, that's going to go down very badly, I think, with the public.
Right, OK. So the MPs are in the chamber. We're expecting President Zelenskyy maybe to be in the public gallery to watch this. But just to reiterate what Barry was telling us, President Zelenskyy will address the MPs then in Westminster Hall, adjacent in the Palace of Westminster. And will this perhaps alter the line of attack that Sir Keir Starmer will take today? That, again, he's got to be seen maybe as statesman-like rather as petty politics.
I think so, because actually this is one area where I think most members of the House can actually agree and show that we have, we are united on some things, which I think perhaps is a little unfortunate for Sir Keir, given that we have had this non-reshuffle of a reshuffle that would have been perfect for him to really...
expensive reorganisation of Whitehall.
Absolutely.
There's going to cost 100 million.
Yes, what can I say? This is a very conveniently timed visit for the Prime Minister. It's interesting that, isn't it? Conservative Prime Ministers getting very convenient photo ops with President Zelenskyy. It just keeps on happening. Who knows
Benedict,
why?
I'm so glad you made these points, because it would have seemed churlish if I'd had to make them.
Although, obviously, it is 1 year on from the invasion, so it marks, obviously, that occasion. And the Speaker, Zelenskyy, Hoyle, with the proceedings fairly shortly. Very quickly, what do you think about the government's idea that, they're reorganising to sort of rally the troops ahead of May elections and a general election?
You've given it away with that reorganising. We all think deck chairs and
that was Labour's
don't
line,
we?
wasn't it?
I mean, really. I applaud the focus on science and technology and investment in science and technology. I think that's absolutely right. We've now got a Department of Energy and Climate Change in all but name again, and that is also good. But let's see the delivery rather than simply rebadging. That's the important thing.
OK, well, I think we will now just head over to the Commons, because it's gone 12. So Lindsay Hoyle, they're the Speaker, as proceedings get underway.
Questions to the Prime Minister. Philip Hollowell. Number one, sir. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that President Zelenskyy is here in the United Kingdom today. It is a testament to the unbreakable friendship between our two countries, and I'm proud that we are expanding the training for Ukrainian forces to include jet pilots and Marines, and ensure that Ukraine has a military able to defend its interests today and into the future. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Philip Hollowell.
Slava Ukraini. President Zelenskyy, we salute you. This year, the start will be made to the rebuild of Kettering General Hospital. Northamptonshire Police will reach 1,500 police officers, the highest number ever in its history. And Kettering is set to become one of the best connected towns for ultra-fast broadband in the whole country, thanks to City Fibre's investment. Together with the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation and tackle the NHS backlogs, isn't it time to tackle head-on the doom and gloom peddled by those who want this country to fail? And to be far more optimistic about the many good things happening in Kettering and across the country?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm glad to hear of all the successes in his constituency, especially the redevelopment of Kettering General Hospital, something I know my honourable friend has been campaigning on tirelessly for years. But he's right, this government will continue to focus on delivering the country's priorities.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 11,000 people have died as a result of the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and that number is sadly rising. And I know many families here in the UK will be anxiously awaiting news. I'm sure I speak for the whole House in saying our hearts go out to each and every victim and their families, and we must do all we can to support the rescue and recovery efforts. Mr. Speaker, this House is honoured to be addressed today by President Zelenskyy. From the outset of the war, he has symbolised the heroism, the resolve and the bravery of his people. The Prime Minister and I joined this House together in 2015. We've lived through important moments in our domestic and international politics. But none of those experiences compares to the pain and suffering of the people of Ukraine. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that right across this House it is vital that we all continue to stand together in full support of Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I first join with the honourable member for paying our respects and thoughts to the people of Turkey and Syria, particularly those affected by the earthquake and the first responders who are doing such a valiant job. The House will be reassured to know that we are in touch with the Turkish and Syrian authorities and providing all assistance that they have required of us, including 77 search and rescue responders that arrived yesterday and have already begun work. And I spoke to the President yesterday to ensure that we are in close communication. And can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments on Ukraine. It's something that not only the whole country can be proud of, but the entire House can be proud that we came together to stand by Ukraine when the moment mattered, and that we will continue to stand with them united as one Parliament and one United Kingdom.
Just for the record, he is the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, because every time Putin has been appeased, he's been back for more. Exactly. And so does the Prime Minister agree with me that across this House we must speak with one voice and say this terrible conflict must end with the defeat of Putin in Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, our objective remains to ensure a Ukrainian victory in this conflict. Vladimir Putin's aggression cannot be seen in any way to have been successful, and that's why we have accelerated and increased our support militarily for Ukraine this year. It's a decision that I took as Prime Minister. Today we are going even further, not just having provided Challenger tanks and being one of the first countries to do so, which catalysed the provision of tanks from other nations as well, but also today to move to start training Ukrainian Marines in the advanced capabilities they will need to mount further offensive, but also to train their pilots on advanced combat aircraft. So the House can be reassured we will continue to support Ukraine to ensure decisive military victory on the battlefield this year.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the additional support the Prime Minister has outlined today? I've had the privilege, I'm sure he has, of seeing firsthand the brilliant work our military is doing in Salisbury to train Ukrainians in defending themselves. We all support this work and the UK's role in the international drive to ensure that Ukraine has the weapons and the technology required to defend herself. Does the Prime Minister agree that continuing this international effort is the only way to ensure Putin's defeat?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the House may not all be aware that actually we have continued to train Ukrainian soldiers because it's something that we have done for years before the conflict started and something that we should be very proud of. But obviously we've intensified those efforts. Last year we trained 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers through Operation Interflex. This year the Defence Secretary announced that last year we'll be training 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers in addition to the Marines and Air Force pilots that I mentioned earlier. But the Right Honourable Gentleman is right to highlight this has been been an international effort. One thing that is a mark of UK leadership in this particular area is that around a dozen other countries have all come here to the UK to take part in our training programs to support Ukrainian soldiers. Many members from around this House will have visited in their constituencies that effort. It's something that's making an incredible difference on the ground, and I know something that the President Zelenskyy is incredibly grateful for.
I think the whole House would like to thank those involved in the incredible training that is going on. Mr. Speaker, before I entered this House, I had responsibility for fighting for justice in The Hague for victims of Serbian aggression. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that when the war in Ukraine is over, Putin and all his cronies must stand at The Hague and face justice?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right that we must hold those to account for the horrific crimes that they have committed. I'm proud that the United Kingdom has played, again, a leadership role in this regard, being one of the first countries to provide financial and technical support, putting investigators on the ground. We're shortly to be hosting a conference together with the Dutch. And also, one of the things that I discussed with President Zelenskyy this morning is our support for the work of the ICC, where, thanks to the efforts of UK members, I'm hopeful that we will see the first indictments very shortly.
Mr. Speaker, across this House, we don't just hope for Ukraine's victory, we believe in it. And part of that victory must be Ukraine's reconstruction. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Russia should pay for the destruction it has caused through the wealth lying dormant in blocked Russian government assets?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are the third largest humanitarian and economic donor to Ukraine, £1.4 billion of support that we have provided through direct grant assistance and guarantees at multilateral lending organisations. And again, the House will remember we took a lead in imposing economic sanctions on Russian entities, including individuals and state-sanctioned assets. We've ensured the provision of funds here will be put in a foundation for reconstruction in Ukraine, and we are currently working with international partners through the legal process to use those assets to fund Ukrainian reconstruction. Of course, that's something that we all want to see, and we're working with our partners to achieve that.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a country, we've always been at our best when we stand up to tyrannical aggressors, threatening their neighbours and peace on our continent. That's why the Labour Party helped found NATO, and why our commitment to NATO is as unshakable today as it was back then. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that whatever differences we may have, no matter what difficulties we face as a country, we in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we remain the leading European ally in NATO, as we always have done. We continue to increase funding in our armed forces by £24 billion at the last spending review to ensure that we maintain not just our NATO obligation to spend 2% of our GDP on defence, but also we participate in every NATO operation and remain the leading nation when it comes to contributions to NATO's Rapid Response Force and the NATO Readiness Initiative. But I join with the Right Honourable Gentleman in saying that this House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Global Combat Air Programme, including Team Tempest, is vital for UK national security and for the world-class aerospace cluster we've got in Lancashire, with many businesses in Burnley and Padiham. This aircraft will protect UK skies, give the RAF the tools it needs for the future, and deepen our relationship with allies like Japan and Italy. So can I ask the Prime Minister, with a refresh of the integrated review taking place, to commit not just to the design and development of this aircraft, but to its production in Lancashire too, providing skilled jobs for generations to come for my constituents and residents all across the county of Lancashire?
Mr. Speaker, I was delighted to announce this landmark international partnership with Japan and Italy in December. Team Tempest partners already employ 2,500 people in the UK, with over 1,200 in the Northwest. And as we are making more progress, we're going to continue to invest in skills and technology at the BAE Systems factory of the future in Lancashire.
Stephen Flynn, leader of the SNP.
So, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, I'd like to send our condolences to all of those impacted by the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and also to welcome the exchange between the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister in respect of Ukraine. We all in this House are united in our condemnation of Vladimir Putin and in our hope for a better future for Ukraine. It will be an honour for all of us to listen to President Zelenskyy this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, in recent days, the former Prime Minister said that she did not regret her time in office. Does the Prime Minister regret her time in office?
I think they'll clear up which one, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to all my predecessors for the contribution that they make to public life, and can I join with the honourable gentleman in saying that I know the whole House will be looking forward to hearing from President Zelenskyy at the conclusion of PMQs.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, hold on a minute. Let's reflect upon the damage that was caused. 30 billion wiped off the UK economy. Pension funds brought to the brink of collapse. The pound reaching parity with the dollar. And interest rates for mortgage holders right across these aisles soaring. Now, the former Prime Minister won't apologise for the damage that she has caused. So on behalf of the Tory party, will he apologise for her?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on the first day that I took office, I said that mistakes had been made. But what we have done is to ensure that right now, he mentioned the pound at a multi-month high, borrowing costs restored back to where they should be, an economy stabilised, a clear plan to halve inflation and grow the economy. That's what the Conservatives are delivering in government, and we continue to deliver it as well for the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Burley House in my constituency is bidding to host the World Eventing Championships in 2026. This event is one of the pinnacles of the sport, and if we were successful in our bid, it would provide a massive boost to the local economy, as well as massive coverage for the UK on the global scene. Burley has a formidable track record of success, having previously hosted 2 World Championships and 6 European Championships. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that Burley would make a fantastic venue, and would he lend us his support so that we can be successful with the bid?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are committed on building on our fantastic track record of hosting events like the Commonwealth Games, the Women's Euros and the Rugby League World Cup. I understand the relevant UK sporting authorities are looking at the location, and I'm sure that they'll be considering Burley in my right honourable friend's constituency in the near future.
And David.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate my party with the comments made about the unfolding human tragedy in Turkey and Syria, and with the warm words to welcome our ally, President Zelenskyy. He will know that this country and this House has total support for Ukraine's resistance to Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion, and it is a source of great pride that the British people have stood firm, united and unwavering in support of the brave heroes of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, when President Zelenskyy addressed this House last year, he asked that we treat Russia as a terrorist state. Since then, Liberal Democrats have been urging the government to fulfil that request by prescribing the Wagner mercenary group. They are doing Putin's bidding, carrying out atrocities against Ukrainians on a daily basis. So on this symbolic day, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister finally commit to prescribing the Wagner Group, a crucial part of treating Russia as the rogue state that it is?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have taken a lead from the beginning of this conflict in sanctioning and taking action against those entities connected with the war effort in Russia and beyond. With regard to Wagner Group, the honourable gentleman will know that we have already sanctioned the Wagner Group in its entirety, as well as taking specific action against particular leaders, as he'll know. With regard to prescriptions, it's not something that we routinely comment on in public, but rest assured we continue to keep all of the prescriptions that we have under review.
Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 22 years ago this month, a good friend of mine died from AIDS. Had he been tested for HIV, I am confident that with the medical advances we have made, he would still be alive today. As my right honourable friend will know, this week is HIV testing, and I welcome the government's ambitions to end new infections by 2030. Can I ask my right honourable friend to thank the Terence Higgins Trust for their incredible work? And will he look to extend opt-out HIV testing to more areas of high prevalence so that we can help discover more undiagnosed cases?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his incredibly thoughtful question and express my sympathies to him on the loss of his friend, and join him in paying tribute to the work of the Terence Higgins Trust, as I know the whole House will also join me in doing. They do fantastic work, and I look forward to talking to my honourable friend about what more we can do to spread HIV testing and prevent more people from needlessly suffering.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government's fiscally illiterate electricity generator levy will choke off billions from future investments in renewable energy projects, the kind of projects that my Angus constituency excels at delivering. This investment will find its way to more favourable jurisdictions, putting thousands of green jobs in Scotland and our energy transition at risk. So will the Prime Minister commit to scrapping this environmentally and economically damaging tax, or will he instead confirm that he and this latest Chancellor know the price of everything and the value of nothing?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no, I don't think it's right that because of a war, when energy companies are making windfall profits, that those profits should go untaxed. Our levy does. It's right that we recover those excess profits from energy companies as a result of the war and give that money back to the country in the form of support with their energy bills. What is economically damaging for Scotland is the SNP's refusal to acknowledge the existence and need for a transition, and that's to support the North Sea oil and gas industry, which we are proud to do.
Mr. Speaker, human trafficking is when you move people legally from one place to another, often with the promise of a job, and then force that person into prostitution or labour exploitation. It has nothing to do with people who come illegally here in small boats. That is smuggling. A third of all human trafficking in the United Kingdom occurs wholly within the borders of the United Kingdom. When I was chairman of the all-party group against human trafficking, we campaigned for an independent commissioner. One was appointed in 2014. However, since April of last year, we have not had one. This is unacceptable. Would the Prime Minister use his good offices to get one appointed urgently?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all his work in this important area. I'm happy to look into the particular position that he mentions, and I know that he is proud, as I am, of our world-leading modern slavery legislation, thanks to the former Prime Minister on these benches. It is a world-leading piece of legislation. We're showing an example about how to tackle this, but I'll make sure that we have someone in place to do the job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are now more than 50% more social care staff vacancy than last year. People are stuck in hospital beds with nowhere to go. In my Bath constituency, the Liberal Democrat Council and our local hospital, the RUH, are trying their level best and trying new innovative solutions to tackle the social care backlog. But the Prime Minister knows that this is a workforce crisis. We must recruit and retain social care staff. So I ask him, will he support the Liberal Democrat proposal to pay a higher minimum wage to social care workers to tackle the social care shortages that underpin the NHS crisis?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we recently announced £14 billion more for health and social care And in particular, that money, part of that money will go to a new discharge fund to speed the discharge of people from hospitals back into their homes and in their communities. That money is already making a difference on the ground. We can see the numbers of people unnecessarily in hospitals are already reducing, easing the burdens in our A&E departments, and that comes on top of the money that we've invested to improve training, recruitment and development of our valued social care staff, and that will make sure that we can reduce vacancy rates, increase retention and get the workforce that we know we need.
Aaron Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, last month, together with fellow North Staffordshire MPs, I hosted an event, a tea party, to welcome Ukrainian refugees living in North Staffordshire. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking the sponsors, in particular Alton Towers, who hosted the event, the host families, and all the people of North Staffordshire who've made our Ukrainian friends so very welcome?
Well, I join my honourable friend in thanking Alton Towers, the other sponsors, and indeed all the families involved in putting on a tea party. I know many members from across the House will have done something similar. It's a wonderful way to show our support for the families that have come here. And again, something that the President this morning mentioned to me, how grateful he is to the United Kingdom that we have opened up our hearts and our homes to help those in his country that need our security and sanctuary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Big Brother Watch recently released a report into unaccountable government bodies such as the Counter-Disinformation Unit, the Rapid Response Unit and the British Army's 77th Brigade. We're seeing huge swathes of public money being spent recording political dissent on social media under the guise of tackling misinformation. Politicians, including myself, the Leader of the Opposition, academics, activists and journalists, and even members of public have been subjected to monitoring by Whitehall officials. This at the same time as we're waiting for the reporting of the Pitchford inquiry into questionable state surveillance on campaigns like the Stephen Lawrence campaign. So can the Prime Minister tell us how much public money is spent on these units and whether he thinks it's a justifiable thing to do in our democracy to spend public money in this manner? And could you also update the House on the progress of the Pitchford inquiry?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have to get back to the Honourable Lady on the Pitchford inquiry and indeed to give her an exact figure. But in general, I think certainly I on this side of the House believe very strongly in free speech and will make sure that we continue to protect it wherever we can.
Bring it forward.
Mr. Speaker, Friday the 24th of February will mark 1 year of Russia's barbaric war in Ukraine. Thousands of people have been killed. Over 1,000 children have been killed or injured. So will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, call for a national minute of silence on that day so that all across the United Kingdom, the people here can show their unending support for the people of Ukraine?
Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all the work that she has done in her previous roles to ensure that we provide appropriate support to those in Ukraine. I thank her very much for her suggestion. I'm sure it's something that we are considering as we speak, and there will be many other ways that we can mark that moment, not least as an international community continuing to show united condemnation and isolation of Russia.
Karen McCarthy.
This week, Mr. Speaker, is Children's Mental Health Week. We know that adverse childhood experiences, whether that be growing up in poverty in the UK or indeed living through the horrors of war in the Ukraine, can have a lifelong impact on mental health. With the number of children in mental health crisis increasing year on year in the UK, does the Prime Minister believe he's doing enough to address the causes of childhood trauma?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable member for her question and let her know that we are doing more to make sure that the extra money we're putting into tackling mental health is particularly focused on young people, where we've seen a very startling increase in the number of young people presenting with mental health conditions that we all would like to arrest and reduce. That's why we're putting more mental health community support into schools and colleges across the country. That's being rolled out as we speak. And also just the other week we announced more money for crisis centres and urgent treatment centres in the mental health space in 100 different communities around the country, which will make a difference.
Richard Graham.
Speaker, this country's military and diplomatic support for Ukraine is strong and has strong support across the country. Less well known is a programme that has gone on for a decade, led by the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, to support the Verkhovna Rada, or Ukrainian Parliament. So does my right honourable friend agree that should this country host a reconstruction conference with the Ukrainians to discuss how Ukraine can win the peace,
that the Foreign Office and the Westminster Foundation and other bodies can come together to see how we can help President Zelenskyy in the next stage of his country's development.
Prime Minister. My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and as we look forward to hosting the Reconstruction Conference for Ukraine later this year, I'll make sure to take up his suggestion and involve all those organisations that can provide support to us and ultimately make sure that we can rebuild Ukraine in the way that it deserves.
Richard Ford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government will want to help maintain popular backing in the UK for our support to Ukraine, including by helping people with their energy bills. More than 40,000 people across Devon live in homes that are off the gas grid. They're on the rural equivalent of prepayment meters. They need the money up front in order to pay for their heating oil and for their alternative fuels. The government announced an alternative fuel payment last September, but people in Devon are still waiting. What will the Prime Minister say to people who are off the gas grid and are waiting for their alternative fuel payment 5 months later?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, we specifically considered people who are off the gas grid when designing the energy support schemes that we put in place, which is why the bulk of the support was delivered to those who had electricity meters to ensure it reached people like he mentioned, including many of my own rural constituents as well. That money should be getting to them. I'll make sure that it moves as quickly as possible. But we also put in place the local household support fund to provide discretionary funding that local councils can give to those households who are most in need.
Dr. Kieran Muller.
Speaker, there's no doubt that the NHS is under enormous pressure across the UK, and despite record numbers of nurses and doctors, workforce remains a challenge. So can I welcome that for the first time the NHS will get an independently verified workforce plan. But we have to think long-term on buildings too, and so in that regard, can the Prime Minister look closely at proposals to rebuild Leighton Hospital, which is a campaign that has the support of thousands of residents in the South Cheshire?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that Leighton Hospital has been allocated over £44 million to address some of the immediate issues at that site, but I also know that the honourable friend is keen to ensure continued investment in his local hospital, and I know that the Department for Health are looking at more hospitals to join the new hospital programme, and I'm sure that they will have heard what he said, indeed the voices of his constituents too.
Liz Twist.
Mr. Speaker, bus services are vital to our communities for work, for health, for school and for socialising. But in a matter of days, the buses that millions depend on will face another crisis with the ending of the bus recovery grant, and predicted cuts of 15 to 20% in mileage will be devastating for people across my constituency and others. Will the Prime Minister commit to extending the bus recovery grant so that communities in my constituency and many others are not left isolated? And will he ask the Transport Secretary to meet with me to discuss this issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we recognise the vital importance of buses in our local communities, and that's why we're well on the way to fulfilling our commitment to invest £3 billion over this Parliament in our bus transformation, and that includes funding for local councils to subsidise unprofitable routes through the Bus Services Operators Grant, and recent money to help cap operator fares at £2 through the spring, and of course we always continue to see how we can support bus services in the long term.
Anna Furr.
Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that apprenticeships, such as those offered by the excellent South Essex College in Leigh-on-Sea, which I visited on Monday for National Apprenticeship Week, are a great pathway into work?
Mr. Speaker, I completely agree with my honourable friend and pay tribute to her local college, particularly in National Apprenticeship Week. And I know something that we discussed just in Cabinet yesterday, we also have the country's first Education Secretary who herself was an apprentice, and it's something we're proud of.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in their condolences to the victims of the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria? Can I also reiterate my thanks to the Foreign Secretary for the speed of the initial UK response? Mr. Speaker, but as we enter the third day of the earthquake, the bitter cold, unforgiving weather means that the likelihood of pulling more survivors from the rubble becomes less and less likely. and the immediate humanitarian impact is devastating. So can I ask the Prime Minister when we can expect an announcement on what further aid his government will commit to relief efforts and what discussions he is having with his international counterparts to ensure our response meets the scale of this crisis?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question and join her in paying tribute to the Foreign Secretary for the work that he's doing. So I spoke to President Erdogan yesterday to reiterate our commitment to provide Turkey with what support they need. Right now, that is search and rescue. She's right, we are in that vital window at the beginning of a situation like this, which is why our search and rescue teams are on the ground providing that assistance. The Foreign Secretary is also speaking to his counterpart at the United Nations to ensure that the humanitarian support that we can provide is well targeted. Also in Syria, where we fund the White Helmets, which are on the ground doing work. We're continuing to be in touch with everyone that we need to, and I can assure the Honourable Lady will continue to provide all the support that is asked of us.
I'm pleased to announce, as members will be aware, that President Zelenskyy will be addressing both houses in Westminster Hall imminently. That will require me to suspend the House's business in a moment. Members attending the address should go directly to the hall following the doorkeeper's directions. The House is expected to resume its sitting at approximately 2 o'clock. The division's bells will be sounded 5 minutes before the resumption. The House is now suspended. Order, order.
Of PMQs and indeed this session of the Commons, because just to explain, they will be heading to Westminster Hall now for this address by President Zelenskyy, but of course the whole issue of Ukraine and President Zelenskyy's visit dominating this session of PMQs. Labour MP Barry Gardiner and political commentator and journalist Benedict Spence still with us. I think fair to say an element of playing to the gallery, because in that gallery, the public gallery, was President Zelenskyy, and fairly sort of statesmanlike introductions from Keir Starmer, which, in terms of the sort of dynamic, meant that Rishi Sunak just had to keep agreeing with him. It's quite a clever ploy, wasn't it?
It was. Look, I think it was good that the House showed how united it is, but certainly Keir Starmer made some very statesmanlike pronouncements, and it was difficult for the Prime Minister then to come back and say anything but, yes, I agree. He didn't have the opportunity in the same way to make the grand oratorical gestures that Keir Starmer did. But I thought it was really good that Keir Starmer put that out there. I thought it was very good that he reminded the country that actually it was the Labour Party that founded NATO. He was very keen to get that in. And I thought it was a very solid performance from Sir Keir, and a difficult pitch, although obviously a great day that the Prime Minister is revelling in the pictures and the photos that were
and it is, of course, the pictures of Rishi Sunak shaking hands with President Zelenskyy, number 10. And interesting, there's certain Boris Johnson has tweeted, "Welcome back to the UK. I look forward to hearing you address Parliament," although he wasn't actually in the Commons there for that.
No, he's probably saving his seat next to President Zelenskyy in Westminster Hall.
He's gone in there already.
He's got in there. His seat. I think this is... I mean, look, as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak will have no shortage of opportunities to speak for the nation, to the nation, about this. So it is a rare opportunity, relatively, for the Leader of the Opposition to get his ability to be statesmanlike across. And that is important, given that the current polling suggests that he could very well be Prime Minister in quite a short space of time. So I don't think that anybody should necessarily begrudge him that. The format of Prime Minister's questions doesn't agree when the debating chamber becomes an echo chamber. It doesn't really work. That's not really what it's for. I thought it was, as we discussed before, it's a good opportunity to show that this is an area on which most MPs are united.
But even given that, there were one or two little sort of barbs in there, with Keir Starmer asking about the whole issue of Ukrainian reconstruction, blocking Russian assets, and I don't think Sunak really answered that, did he?
No, and I think it's, at this point in time, I think it's very difficult if you are a national leader to make sort of firm commitments, because actually it's still really up in the air what is going to happen. As much as Keir Starmer Rishi Sunak can say, we are committed to a Ukrainian victory this year, that is very far from a foregone conclusion. And there is, of course, the nightmare situation, potentially, where Russia if not succeeds, but comes out of this stronger than it went into it. And that is unfortunately a country you will have to deal with at some point, because it is too powerful to be ostracised on the world stage, as the West has tried to do it. It's demonstrated that by the fact that its economy is bouncing back quite so hard from the sanctions.
And an additionally interesting point then, Keir Starmer reminding that he'd taken part in the legal moves, if you like, after Serbia's aggression
at The Hague,
and talking about taking Russia then to the court. And I think Rishi Sunak indicating that perhaps moves were already underway on that, which was an interesting aside.
Yes, look, the war crimes that have taken place and are now beginning to be documented will have to be brought to global account.
Yeah.
How one does that with a country like Russia is extremely difficult to see. Now,
physically getting Putin in the dock in The Hague.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you know, the US certainly has refused to be part of the court system, the Universal Court of Human Rights. And I have a feeling that Russia will feel that what's good enough sauce for the goose is good enough
and
sauce
may
for
cause
it.
all sorts of complications at United Nations. But I mean, just the direct quote that he had was he hopes that the first indictments will follow soon.
Yes.
So perhaps there will be some kind of official announcement at The Hague on that.
Yes, let's hope so, because the evidence is now mounting up.
Yeah. What do you think President Zelenskyy will have made of this? Because we did have one question on the Burley horse eventing, and I think there were some other constituency matters that he may have been scratching his head about parliamentary procedure.
I don't think he'll have been oblivious to the fact that other things will have been discussed. He might have almost been a little bit sort of nostalgic for a time when things were a little bit more mundane, perhaps. And I think it does actually throw into relief, actually, relatively how easy we have it. And we talk about almost every week about the many crises that we currently face in this country, all pale in comparison to what's going on in Ukraine. So, he might well have been sitting there going, well, I wish I had the issues that they have in Kettering or with the bus services.
A bit of light relief.
Yes, it must have been, a change of pace, I think, from what he used to, which is, he probably has to deal with all kinds of things that our current political leaders just can't possibly put themselves in the headspace of.
And just having to move from place to place for safety and not sleep in the
Well, that's the thing. If a bus service doesn't work in Ukraine, then it's potentially a matter of life and death, because you need them to be able to get refugees out of a place, let alone people get to work.
Yeah.
I think one of the cleverest questions asked by a backbencher was actually by Belriberi, because here we are talking about freedom of speech. And she, of course, then brought that back to the domestic plane when she said, well, look, what is all this monitoring
going on
of MPs like me? Are you so concerned about freedom of speech that you're not releasing this report that goes back to the Stephen Lawrence days?
Yeah.
Let's put our own house in order.
Yes.
And I thought that was a very smart question to be asking on a day like this.
Again, it's electronic eavesdropping that's said to be going on.
Well, it's also it's a cross-party issue, because, of course, this doesn't just apply to things like Stephen Lawrence, it applies to things like lots of journalists on both sides of the divide have discovered that they were being monitored. So, again, yes, it's one of those areas. And you could see, actually, Rishi Sunak, he didn't really have an answer to it, and you suspect he wouldn't have had an answer to it no matter what had happened. But it's going to be a point of contention, I think, if MPs keep bringing that up.
And we'll come back in a moment about Ferrier Clark, the Enfield MP, and the whole issue of Turkey and what's going on there, because that's another issue. Gentlemen, for the moment, thank you. But let's just actually bring in Catherine Foster, our political reporter who's in Westminster. And Catherine, of course, all those MPs now busily queuing to get into Westminster Hall behind you for the address. And we assume that perhaps Boris Johnson will be there, because he tweeted his welcome rather than being on the benches there in the Commons.
I would expect so. I don't think that he would miss this moment for all the world. Of course, he was a massive supporter of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and Britain really did lead the way, didn't they, when Russia invaded Ukraine last year. So, yes, I'm certain that he will be there. But in the meantime, what a different Prime Minister's questions it was. We're used to people, trying to score points, jeering at each other, shouting. This was very, very different. The House, for once, and it doesn't happen very often, does it, united around the need to support the earthquake victims in Turkey and Syria, of course, and also Ukraine. Keir Starmer was very keen to establish Labour's credentials on this because, of course, going back under Jeremy Corbyn, many people had worries about what Labour's foreign policy might have been. But Keir Starmer stressing Labour's rock-solid support of NATO, saying that they'd been involved in the founding of it and saying that every time Putin is appeased, he's been back for more, and that Putin and his cronies must be brought to justice. For Rishi Sunak's part, obviously, he is completely delighted that Volodymyr Zelenskyy has chosen to come to Britain. This is only the second time he's been abroad since the war started nearly a year ago. Of course, he was in the States late last year. And keen to lay out our achievement, saying that the UK has given £1.4 billion of support to Ukraine to date, that last year the UK trained 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and that this year they're aiming to train 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers, plus the Marines and the fighter jets that we've been hearing about. So yes, everybody is now trooping across to the cavernous Westminster Hall, a lot of the media as well, of course, a real sense of excitement, and what a glorious day it is here in Westminster.
Yeah, and an interesting point you picked up there, Catherine, because it's not just about words, it's about weapons as well. Significant number of Ukrainian soldiers being trained. But this issue that it's pilots as well, because, of course, we had this whole debate as to whether the F-16 fighters would be going out to Ukraine. And an indication, perhaps, that the UK is quite keen to see the beginning of this process in terms of the Ukrainian Air Force being trained in these advanced NATO fighters.
Yes, there does seem to be a shift taking place, doesn't there? Of course, it's only 2 or 3 weeks since the UK was the first country to pledge modern military tanks to go to Ukraine. And then Volodymyr Zelenskyy immediately started asking for jets. And initially the answer seemed to be no, that they were too complex, that it would take Ukrainian pilots too long to train. But now the UK has agreed to train them. So that would seem to pave the way for us potentially applying, jets in the future, although that has not been agreed. But certainly that would seem to be the direction of travel at the moment, yes.
Indeed. Catherine, thank you for that. Back to you, because shortly, with all the MPs heading now towards Westminster Hall there. But let's return to our panel, and Barry and Benedict still with us.
All but one.
Well, yes, indeed.
You've got me here under false pretenses.
I hope you've got a little ticket, someone's put on a seat for you, but you might.
I wish.
But just to touch on something we mentioned there, and that was towards the end of PMQs, the MP for Enfield, Ferial Clark, of Turkish origin herself, and we know that much underway in Enfield with the local community there, getting aid effort together, supplies and so on, but also perhaps a growing anger or criticism of the Turkish effort, the government effort, that some areas seem to be getting more help than others.
Yes, and that criticism is that it has been politically motivated, where the help has gone, to Erdogan's supporters. Look, I think for all of the Turkish community, obviously not just in Enfield, but across London, across the UK, they are desperately concerned about their relatives who are caught up in this enormous catastrophe.
Yes, 650 mile long, this section of fault line.
It is absolutely huge, this. Yeah. And it's going to take, a decade to see the sort of reconstruction and rebuild those communities, rebuild those houses. And we really do need to think about what more we can do, not just in the immediate, but in the medium and long term.
Yeah, the Prime Minister's saying we've got these 77 experts and I think four teams of sniffer dogs out there at the moment. They've actually arrived. They left from Birmingham. But, when one looks at the area that's involved and the numbers, perhaps we actually need to get a much bigger international response.
one of the things that people seem to be forgetting is that it's not just in Turkey, it's also in Syria, and the horrible situation there, which is that could potentially lead to more people dying in Syria than in Turkey, where the epicenter is, because of the lack of resources there. And what will also hamper the rescue efforts there are the sanctions that are being imposed against the government in Syria. So you do have this, this sort of two-pronged approach that you need to take, where you'll need to be working with Turkey, which is easier to do, but you'll have to use back channels and other actors to work with Syria if you're going to help people there. And that will be essential because, of course, a great deal of people have already left Syria for the West as refugees and economic migrants because of the situation there. A lot more people will continue to leave if there is no reconstruction effort there.
And just the physical difficulty of gaining access and roads that have been blown up and so on. I mean, there are some reports that they've not been confirmed yet that actually there's some bombing going on in those areas where the rescue efforts are underway, that Assad's forces are bombed.
Wouldn't be surprised at all.
Which is just extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because ultimately what is more important for Bashar Assad is control, actually. And if it's in places where, for example, his political enemies are, why waste a perfect opportunity to attack those people would be absolutely the approach that a regime like his would take. And again, that's why it is such a complex situation in that country, which we already know is sort of perpetually teetering on the brink. And equally, it's why we need to send a lot of support to Turkey, because Turkey is the front line in terms of taking refugees from that country.
I think I'm right in saying we do financially support the White Helmets in Syria, which is an independent relief.
We do, but of course, they are not particularly well liked by Assad, and that's the thing. We have very little influence in Syria relatively because we do not support the people who are in charge. Who does? That's Iran, that's Russia. That's not the people that we want to be in charge. But that is the situation.
I think we can show you some pictures now of Westminster Hall. Barry, you may want to look away now because of course, you're missing all this. But we can bring you a taste of what you should be seeing. I think we're just getting the feed fairly shortly because clearly lots of security involved, as you can see, with a number of police and the other state security agencies. I mean, this visit was kept very much a surprise for obvious reasons. And we saw I think, a Voyager aircraft touching down at Stansted a little earlier, and then the motorcade with lots of outriders. But President Zelenskyy now firmly through the gates. And just to explain to us, Barry, it's a fairly short walk through to Westminster Hall, which is where, in fact, we've got a shot here. I think that might be President Zelenskyy's Range Rover that's been provided for him, dropping him off. People will be familiar. This is the area where the Queen was lying in state. And there we are, look. And he's dressed for the occasion.
No, this is not. He's going into the Speaker's house.
Oh, this is the other end, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
He's meeting the Speaker on the left and the Lord Speaker on the right. So they're obviously going to take him up into the Speaker's apartments and from there probably to Westminster Hall.
And this would be because the Speaker is formally in charge of the Palace of Westminster.
Absolutely.
So it is his position rather than the Prime Minister to welcome him to Westminster.
Yes, absolutely. He's the boss.
Yeah. And this obviously reflects the history, that the mother of parliaments and all that goes with that. And those pictures being seen back in Ukraine, this is their president on the world stage.
Yes. And of course, the Speaker being the boss goes back to Speaker Lenthal when King Charles I came and demanded that the 5 parliamentarians were handed over. Speaker Lenthal got down on one knee and said, "Sire, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak, but that this House doth command me." In other words, bugger off.
Yeah, well,
we're keeping our MPs
we
safe.
apologise for the unparliamentary language this lunchtime. I hope we haven't broken the Ofcom code on that particular occasion, but it was a direct quote from history. Anyway, let's just reflect on the numbers here in the hall. That's an extraordinary sight, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, it's an extraordinary moment, really. I mean, this is the second stop after the White House, and after that, President Zelenskyy is going to Brussels and then Warsaw. He's picked who he's going to meet very carefully, and I think, as we've been talking about, there is unity in Parliament across much of the country about the support for Ukraine. And I think, this is an opportunity to see history, as much as MPs are the same as anybody else.
There's an interesting shot there of the 2 adversaries at PMQs being rather more in collegiate agreement there, although you know, we were reflecting it was a non-abrasive session today.
Perhaps he's apologising for not giving him much to work with, other than to just say, yes, I agree with
Yes, I agree with you. It was quite a clever approach, though, wasn't it?
It was. And I think, you know, somebody who's as experienced a lawyer and a public speaker as Sakir was always going to play it like that. But as I said earlier, you know, there will be other opportunities for Rishi Sunak to, you know, give it large on the big stage with President Zelenskyy.
Well, yeah, and the amount of stuff that we're providing Ukraine, which is a pretty impressive shopping list.
Yeah. Mark, while we're waiting for Zelenskyy to appear, I just wonder if we should reflect on why this is happening now, why Zelenskyy is going on this grand tour now. Because I think everybody understands that the winter is seeing the ground war grind to a halt. And there's a perception that there will be a huge Russian offensive,
spring offensive
immediately after the snows have cleared. And I think this whole PR exercise that Zelensky's going on round the capitals, he's done Washington, he's now here, he's going to Brussels. I think this is about saying to the rest of the world, look, things are going to get worse before they get better for us in Ukraine.
Right.
And we really need to know that you are completely behind us.
Is it also a signal to the Kremlin with this, these images being shown? We are not alone. If you take us on, you are taking on NATO, even though Ukraine is not yet technically part of NATO.
Well, indeed. I wouldn't say taking on NATO, because NATO is not a combatant in this conflict. And it's absolutely essential that we always make that clear. Because many of us think that actually Putin would like to be able to say that.
To that end, it's key that he's going to Warsaw and not Berlin, because Berlin has made it very clear that it is of that, but, you know, it cannot risk a war between Russia and NATO, whereas Warsaw, which sees itself and is positioning itself very much as the polar opposite of Moscow in what is going to become effectively a sort of a pan-Slavic conflict over the next 10 years. That's what it anticipates. But it is in NATO, and it is very keen that we get a lot tougher with Russia.
Yeah, interesting that on that very point, we've now got the older Leopard 1 tanks being provided effectively by NATO countries, in addition to the Leopard 2 tanks, which Germany is supplying directly. And, of course, they went through all sorts of gymnastics, political gymnastics to achieve that.
Yes, I mean, there are many reasons why Germany is taking the stance that it has, and that would take too long for us to actually delve into that. But it does, I think, it symbolises a changing of the guard. It hasn't quite happened yet. But as has been discussed often in this country about how we're going to fall behind Poland's economy in the next 10 years, Germany is also on course for that as well.
Boris Johnson, I think, just spotted there. My producer can see that mop of blonde hair. So he is there. Not in the front row, but not far behind.
He wasn't fast enough.
He wasn't, well, yes. Despite him training with his jogging. Well, he's moving on manoeuvres, perhaps, heading towards the front. Let's see who he ends up next to. But, I mean,
pushing through.
Joking aside, I mean, he has been, obviously, a tremendous personal supporter of Zelenskyy, and clearly there was a relationship that was built up there.
Yes, look, absolutely. And it was right that the UK Prime Minister had that strong presence and that strong relationship. Whatever one thinks about the PR reasons that Johnson enjoyed that, and also I think how he played it at moments when his premiership was going through various crises. He tended to play the Ukrainian card, or the Zelenskyy card, in order to get him out of a few odd scrapes here.
I think you can't get away from the fact that one of the few things that Boris Johnson does have, and I know we all have this public perception of him that can, you know, differ from what he's like, he's actually very good with other world leaders in a one-on-one situation. That's not just good in terms of giving somebody like Zelenskyy, an out. It's also good at bridging the gap with other world leaders who perhaps are a little bit more reluctant. I think of all of the things that Boris Johnson will be remembered for, and not all of them, in fact, very few of them, I think will be positive at this moment in time. You know, hold off, there might be a comeback, who knows. But still, this is one thing that he does have. This is one thing that he does have, that he has led the way on.
In terms of legacy.
Absolutely. It's one of the few things.
Well, just to explain to you what we're seeing here, this is Westminster Hall. You remember this is where the Queen's, late Queen's coffin was laid in waiting, now full of these parliamentarians for this address by President Zelenskyy, the President of Ukraine, who arrived at Stansted Airport earlier. He is currently meeting the Speaker in the Speaker's office, the Speaker, of course, being technically in charge of the Palace of Westminster, so therefore it's his role to welcome him officially there. Catherine Foster is just outside for us. And Catherine, clearly this is relating to that interesting phrase that we heard from Sir Keir Starmer, standing on the shoulder of giants, in terms of all the history that's attached to this.
Yes, Westminster Hall, one of the very oldest parts of the Houses of Parliament, which is, of course, an incredibly historic building, and really looking absolutely resplendent with the sun, not a cloud in the sky here, shining through. It's just wonderful. And of course, this is the place that everybody wants to be, the politicians, the press. This really is a moment in history. We've had a couple of those recently, haven't we, with Her Majesty the Queen obviously lying in state in this room back in the autumn, very sudden and unexpected as it was then. So many people came to pay their respects, stood in the queue for many hours, as we know that actually the floor was damaged by that and they had to repair it, and now there is the plaque where she lay in state. But today, I believe Volodymyr Zelenskyy will be speaking in English. Previously, of course, he has addressed the House of Commons. That's been via video link. It's been in Ukrainian. So this really is something very different. And of course, wanting to send a clear message to Vladimir Putin and to the world that the UK and the West as a whole stand squarely behind Ukraine. Because, as we know, winter is going to be coming to an end shortly. There's been something of a lull in the fighting during winter. But as the weather begins to improve, it's likely that Russia will relaunch the offensive, and a real hurry now to get those tanks to Ukraine. The tanks that were promised by Britain, I believe, will be delivered next month. The troops are being trained. And after this, of course, Volodymyr Zelenskyy will be meeting with the King, and then later on today will be going to visit the troops that are being trained in the UK. We trained 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers last year. This year, Rishi Sunak was saying that they're aiming to double that number. And also, of course, as we've been told, they're now going to be training fighter pilots and Marines as well.
I think he's obviously going to be seeing some of the hardware as well. The 14 Challenger tanks, Challenger 2s, we know will be heading out by the end of March, but 24 AS-90 self-propelled guns, armoured vehicles, precision-guided missiles, 100,000 artillery rounds, more anti-tank missiles, 3 million rounds of small arms ammunition. I mean, it's quite a shopping list. And will there be political fallout? Because, of course, there's a question mark about this phrase that's been used about the hollowing out of our own armed defence and armament industry, that we're supplying all this to Ukraine when perhaps, we need a bit more kit at home as well.
Well, certainly there has been a lot of concern. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, last year wanted defence spending to be upped to 3% of GDP. That hasn't happened. And of course, in the fact that we are sending all these armaments, all this military support to Ukraine, it means that we have less. So still some question marks. And there has been some criticism, of course, by senior people in the military of what this means for our own defences. But I think there's no question that there's a unity here, but clearly Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, and many others in the military would like a lot more money put into UK defence. But of course, there are many, many departments at the moment wanting more money, and Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor in particular are keeping quite a tight control of the purse strings.
Indeed. Let's bring you a bit of breaking news that we're getting from the joint investigation team of 6 countries probing the crash of the Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. The words that they're using, there are strong indications that Russian President Vladimir Putin himself approved the supplying of the missile that shot down the plane, a Bucktelar missile system that was used back in 2014 to shoot down the Malaysia Airlines plane flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. This is coming out as we speak. 298 passengers and crew killed, of course, when the missile slammed into the plane. Strong indications, say the investigators, that the Russian president decided on supplying the Pothole separatists. Anyway, let's just break away from that. We'll reflect on it in a moment. We're just about to hear from President Zelenskyy now in Westminster Hall.
Mr. President, Lescavo, Prosimo, the rest of us, welcome. Not many people stood here today in this significant setting will realise that our friendship began on the 8th of October 2020 when you were the first ever head of state that I met as Speaker. We hit it off immediately, with much laughter over an English afternoon tea and, of course, chorley cakes. And we forged an instant bond, despite wearing masks and being socially distanced at the opposite ends of a large table, because like the rest of Europe, we were working out how to deal with COVID. Little did we know that our relationship would grow in such turbulent times. On the 24th of February 2022, the second invasion of Ukraine began. On the 8th of March 2022, there was another first for us both. I suspended the House of Commons so that you could address in Ukrainian through the screens in our chamber, which we still refer to them as Zelenskyy screens. The atmosphere was electrifying. You could hear a pin drop before you came online, a very, very rare thing in the House of Commons. You spelled out the horrors of the first 13 days of war. Your speech was devastating and powerful. Today, on the 8th of February 2023, now deep into the war, we are honoured that you have put yourself at risk to address us and again shine a light on the fact your country is still fighting for its survival. This hall has been the place of many great historical events. Your presence here today adds another to them. The war, as you know better than any of us, has lasted for nearly a year. As you told us last year, this is a war Ukraine did not start and did not want. But it is a war you've had to fight, and our commitment to support you and your people has not wavered. I was considering what could be said at this important occasion. I thought back to the 1990s. Then we hoped that all countries that emerged from the former Soviet Union could secure freedom and prosperity. There was a moment of hope over that time, and we knew it would be a long time that each country could choose its own destiny. It is a tragedy that Ukraine's efforts to bring freedom, prosperity to its people has been met with war and death. Last year, building on our friendship, I welcome your wife, Madame Zelenskyy, to Parliament to open deliberately a provocative exhibition. I wanted to ensure the experience of your people is kept at the forefront of our minds. I do not believe any of us in this room were complacent about the reality of conflict, but those displays shocked us. The images stayed with us. They brought home the horrors of war. Horrors inflicted on your people, fighters, civilians alike. Horrors which cannot be avoided or denied. I applaud Ukraine's refusal to forget what is you and your people are fighting for. In the words of the Ukrainian Eurovision winners, Kyolosha Orchestra, they said, "I always find my way home, even if all roads are destroyed." Fighting for a country is not simply fighting for territory. It is a fight for home and for an ideal. The endurance of the people of Ukraine honours those ideals. Their refusal to allow war to destroy their humanity honours their ideals. Quite rightly, last year you said, Ukrainians have become big over the 13 days of this war. You have become even bigger in your determination, not just to fight for your country, but to stand by the ideals you are fighting for. We will not give up on those ideals. We'll continue to support you against that Russian aggressor. And I pledge here today, in front of all of you, to do all I can to keep the plight of Ukraine in the spotlight. Later this year, the UK and Ukraine will be united in music, but we will always be united in our unwavering belief in the power of democracy. Slava Ukraina. Mr. President, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The people of the United Kingdom and their honourable representatives, all the people of England and Scotland, of Wales and Northern Ireland, of all the lands which have been home to brave souls since Europe came into existence. I have come here and stand before you on behalf of the brave, on behalf of our warriors who are now in the trenches under enemy artillery fire, on behalf of our air gunners and every defender of the sky who protects Ukraine against enemy aircrafts and missiles, on behalf of our tank men who fight to restore our Ukrainian borders, on behalf of our conscripts who are being trained now, including here in Britain. Thank you, Britain. And who will be then deployed to the front line, skilled, equipped, and eager to win. On behalf of every father and every mother who are waiting for their brave sons and brave daughters back home from the war. Mr. Speaker, you may, I think, well remember, as roughly more than 2 years ago, we met with you here in Parliament. Great honor was for me. And I remember we enjoyed tea. We talked, of course, talked a lot about our people and about our countries, about the British and Ukrainian political traditions Mr. Prime Minister Rishi, when we had our meeting earlier today, and I said to you that I will tell a story in my address to the Parliament, and a story about my feelings on my first visit to London as President in autumn 2020. The program was packed. Royal Highnesses William and Catherine, and Buckingham Palace, and aircraft carrier of the Royal Navy, the Westminster, of course, Downing Street, and of course, the war rooms. And there is an armchair in the war room, the famous Churchill's armchair, and a guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your bravery. Thank you very much from all of us. Yes, please. That is for you. All applause for you. London has stood with Kyiv since day one. From the first seconds and minutes of the full-scale war, Great Britain, you extended your helping hand when the world had not yet come to understand how to react. Boris, you got others united when it seemed absolutely impossible. Thank you. All of you all showed your grit and character back then, strong British character. You didn't compromise Ukraine, and hence you didn't compromise your ideals, and thus you didn't compromise the spirit of these great islands. Thank you very much. And of course, everybody understands that our countries knew absolutely different times. Our nations defended freedom in the Second World War. The Iron Curtain divided us. Our people went through crisis and growth, through inflation and periods of social losses and social gains. It was tough, but we always found strength and stamina to move ahead and achieve results. This is the bedrock of our land and your traditions. Ukrainians and Brits defeated the fear of war and had the time to enjoy peace. No matter what we encountered on different stages of our and your formidable history, and you and us and the whole mankind achieved similar result. Evil lost. Evil lost. We will always come out on top of evil. This lies at the core of our, but also your traditions. However, the horizon never stays clear for a while. Once the old evil is defeated, the new one is attempting to rise its head. Do you have a feeling that the evil will crumble once again? I can see in your eyes now we think the same way as you do. We know freedom will win. We know Russia will lose. And we really know the victory will change the world. And this will be a change that the world has long needed. The United Kingdom is marching with us towards the most important victory of our lifetime. It will be a victory over the very idea of the war. After we win together, any aggressor, it doesn't matter, big or small, will know what awaits him if he attacks international order. Any aggressor who will try to push the boundaries by force, who will inflict destruction and death on other peoples, who will try to endure his dictatorship at the expense of other people's blood in criminal and unprovoked wars, as the Kremlin does. Any aggressor is going to lose. Ladies and gentlemen, we have already achieved remarkable results, and we must make every effort to turn our achievements into the foundations of the future global security architecture. The world needs your leadership, Britain, just as it needs Ukrainian bravery. When the full-scale invasion began, we, together with you, Britain, and United States and other allies, formed a true coalition of friends. That is very important. You were among those very few who had helped before the large-scale invasion began, exactly as it will be necessary every time in the future to prevent aggression from happening. Your help was preventive. We must take these principles of preventive aid to those who are threatened with aggression, and preventive sanctions against those who threaten aggression as basic principles of the world anti-war policy. We created a coalition of NLAW. Thank you. Of NLAW and Javelin that stopped the advance of the Russian army from the first day of the invasion. We built the coalition of artillery rounds and a coalition of air defense, which allow us to save the lives of our children, of our people, of our civilians, our women, our elderly, and our cities from Russian atrocious occupation and missile terror. We put together a powerful sanction coalition, and your leadership is protecting international legal order through sanctions against a terrorist state cannot be questioned. And we have to steadily continue along this way until Russia is deprived of any possibility to finance the war. Most importantly, together with the G7, we brought about a coalition of values. a coalition that protects the rule-based world order and human rights, a coalition that will work in such a way that over time there will simply be no gray areas in the world in which human life doesn't matter. In order for it to be so, there must be justice. Anyone who invests in terror must be held accountable. Anyone who invests in violence must compensate those who have suffered from terror. Terror, aggression, or other forms of state violence. Our proposals for the creation of a special tribunal for the crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine and special compensation mechanism which will compensate war losses at the expense of Russian assets are based on such principles. Justice is one of 10 elements of the peace formula proposed by Ukraine and supported by Britain. I thank you for your readiness to invoke the formula. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you very much. As I already mentioned, Ukrainian soldiers are being trained in Britain, in particular to operate Challengers, your main battle tanks, and it's a tank coalition in action. And I thank you, Rishi. Thank you very much for this powerful defensive step for tank assistance. Thank you. The coalition of long-range missiles is the latest of all. It will allow us to make the evil completely retreat from our country by destroying its headways deep in the occupied territories. And it's not just, I'm not speaking just about weapons. We proved together that the world truly helps those who are brave in defending freedom, and thus paves the way for a new history, a history of the world that knows how to be quick in help, who knows how to be effective in defense, who knows how to remain principled in dark hours, who implements its treaties and arrangements in good faith, who does not allow perpetrators to enjoy immunity, who knows how to overcome veto when it's abused, who knows no fear, and who knows how to win. This shall be the new reality of the free world, I'm sure. However, evil is still around today, and the battle continues. Yes, we know how it's going to end and how we are going to feel on the day victory comes. Every day we continue to pay with lives, pain and tears for bringing victory closer, with the lives of our people, our heroes, whom we lose in battles, with the lives of our heroes who take life and death risks every day to save as many of our soldiers and civilians as possible. And today I will have the honor to be received by His Majesty the King. it will be a truly special moment for me, for our country. And in particular, because I will convey to him from all the Ukrainians the words of gratitude for the support His Majesty showed to them when he was still the Prince of Wales. And I also intend to tell him something that is, I think that is very, very, very important, not only for the future of Ukraine, but also for the future of Europe. In Britain, the king is an Air Force pilot. And in Ukraine today, every Air Force pilot is a king. For us, just for us, for our families. Because they are so few, they are so precious that we, the servants of our kings, do everything possible and impossible to make the world provide us with modern planes to empower and protect pilots who will be protecting us. And I am proud of our Air Force. And I brought a present from them to you, Great Britain. Yes, please, open, please. Yes. Yes. To the speaker. Yes, speaker. I will explain. It's the helmet of a real Ukrainian pilot. He is one of our most successful aces, and he's one of our kings. And the writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it." I trust this symbol will help us for our next coalition of the planes, and I appeal to you and the world with simple and yet most important words: combat aircrafts for Ukraine, wings for freedom. Great Britain, you and us both struggle for peace, but instead we are forced to face the range that seeks to deprive us of peace and everything else that is valuable in life. Unfortunately, it is in human nature to allow evil mature. It then stands up against humanity. It then destroys and kills. It launches aggressions and breaks people's lives. You and us have already fought together against such evil. You and us already have the experience of defeating the evil that is generated by human nature. I'm not saying there will be no more wars after the war ends. No. It is impossible to completely erase evil from human nature. Yet it is in our power to guarantee with words and deeds that the light side of human nature will prevail. The side you and us share, and this stands above anything else. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your support. and leaving British Parliament 2 years ago, I thanked you for delicious English tea. And I will be leaving the Parliament today, thanking all of you in advance for powerful English planes. By the way, it's almost 5 o'clock. God bless Great Britain and long live the King. Slava Ukraini!
Echoes Churchill and President Zelenskyy reflecting on his time in London in October 2020 when he visited the war rooms, where, of course, Churchill was based in the Second World War, sitting in his armchair, saying he felt something significant which he only now understood. He said how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory. And, of course, that lesson of history, or lessons of history, lacing that historic speech to the MPs here in Westminster Hall. The official welcoming still underway, but as he was reflecting, he will be visiting Buckingham Palace to meet the King a little later, and then reflecting that the King, of course, has got his RAF wings. President Zelenskyy saying every Air Force pilot for us is a king. They are so few, they are so precious. And then that presentation of that Ukrainian Air Force helmet to the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. On the side of that helmet written, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it." And then reflecting the last time he visited Sir Lindsay Hoyle, it was tea. This time he says, "Give us your powerful English planes." Barry Gardiner still with us, and Dominic Smith. It couldn't have been plainer, could we? You know,
plainer.
Yeah, plainer. We need the planes, and that is really what underlines the history and the other aspects of freedom and so on that he spoke about.
Yes, Mark, I think this whole visit is extremely strategic from Zelensky's point of view. We talked before and we said that the training of those pilots was a critical element, and it was being played up beforehand. But here we now see the full force of it. Britain is clearly on board. What I think the rest of his trip to Europe will need to do is to persuade other countries that this is now the next stage in making sure that Ukraine can win the war, that Ukraine can reclaim its territory and withstand the huge offensive that Russia is about to make once the spring offensive gets underway. So I think it's a very strategic move that Zelensky's made, decision to come here to Europe at this point in time and persuade. And you couldn't get more forceful than he was in saying, this is what we need. If you stand for freedom, you need to give us the aircraft to support it.
Yeah, and Benedict, interesting sort of Churchillian phrases coming through and reflecting on the whole issue of global security architecture, you know, post-war, and that the aggressor was going to lose. And this reflection on how he felt when he sat in Churchill's armchair in those war rooms, the cabinet war rooms.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's one of those things that is very evocative for people in Europe, is the idea of Winston Churchill. You know, we tend to think of him as just being, for us, Winston Churchill, this great hero, but of course, to many people in Eastern Europe, the memories of Churchill and his broadcasts across Europe will still ring very true. And of course, Ukraine is as much part of that as any. It'll resonate
and of course,
very,
we
very
remember
clearly.
Churchill was the person that adopted that phrase, the Iron Curtain, which Zelenskyy referred to.
Absolutely, in which so many countries unfortunately found themselves on the wrong side of. And I think that of course, that also plays very strongly to other nations in Europe. The idea that if Russia is allowed to push up through Ukraine, then suddenly it is Slovakia on its doorstep, it is Poland on its doorstep, and then that gets a little too close for comfort, hopefully, he thinks, for places like Germany.
Yeah, defending freedom, preventing aggression from happening, the lessons of war, effectively. However, given what we saw in terms of Germany, its reluctance to provide the tanks, he's wanting, I guess, this to reverberate around the rest of Europe and seeing that post-war link that Britain had to all the other nations.
Absolutely. And it's not an error or a mistake in any way that he has chosen to go to Warsaw rather than to Berlin. Warsaw, of course, Poland was the casus belli. It was the reason that the UK entered the Second World War.
And the treaty that we had with them.
And the treaty that we had with them. And of course, Poland has been a strong supporter of Ukraine all throughout the conflict, receiving over 1 million refugees. So I think this is very carefully managed, brilliantly done. The question does remain, will NATO think that it is a step too far to give the F-16s, to give that strike capacity in the air? The danger has always been that if one of those planes encroaches on Russian airspace, it could be taken as NATO being at war with Russia.
Yeah.
Or
even if there's a dogfight with a Russian plane over contested territory.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think this is something which, yes, on an occasion like this, we can see Parliament applauding the great speech and applauding the sentiment. Will the parliaments of NATO actually follow through and deliver?
I think we're already at a stage, though. We need to see we're at a stage where those sort of lines are being blurred. Israel is considering sending its technology to Ukraine because it's ignored Iran's shipping of drones to Russia for long enough and has decided, actually, we have to take a stance here. We cannot allow our adversaries to be supporting another country and just turn a blind eye. Similarly, Russia is being supplied by a lot of munitions and arms from China. That is coming, and it will continue to be, actually, as time goes on. And this is why it is, I think it's very key that Zelenskyy points out that this is a broader thing. This isn't just about Ukraine. It is, and in that sense, it is a call to arms for NATO countries, whether or not they plan to send them to Ukraine. It is saying to countries that have been underspending on their defence commitments for a long time, you don't have that long before other countries will start to eye up your interests and throw their weight around.
The UK is marching with us towards victory over the very idea of war. I mean,
It was a very clear message that he sent not only to Russia, but to China, that if they thought they could now invade Taiwan, and we've had all that in the news over the past year, that tension that's been building up there, then they were mistaken, because freedom will not be overcome by an invasion. And that, I think, was a message not just to Russia, but to the rest of the world.
But also, again, to the UK as one of the few countries outside of the United States that has operational carrier groups that would almost certainly be drawn into an overseas conflict. We would
the Black Sea, you mean?
Well, not even in the Black Sea, actually. I mean, within our lifetimes, we will almost certainly see manoeuvres made by other countries in the South Atlantic, and China will probably be at the forefront of that. It is right now building a military installation in Ushuaia in Argentina. It's very clear what its ambitions are. And that is not even, people thinking about, will we be drawn into a war in Taiwan? That is British territory.
And already has the world's biggest naval force.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, thank you for that. Stay with us. But let's speak now to a Ukrainian MP, another parliamentarian, Sviatoslav Yurash, who's a member of President Zelensky's Servant of the People party, who has been listening and watching these historic scenes in the Palace of Westminster, in Westminster Hall. Mr. Yurash, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I hope you can still see and hear the pictures with President Zelenskyy there shaking hands with all the political leaders and taking time to have a little word. Jeffrey Donaldson there. And, of course, we had President Zelenskyy singling out Boris Johnson in particular for his help and in terms of his work, really, to acknowledge that it had to be a joint approach with Boris bringing on others into that early coalition. And I don't know if let's just maybe stay with these pictures, because I suspect he may reach Boris Johnson fairly shortly. And we'll see if there's something more of a handshake as the two friends, as they are, as well as, of course, as political allies, meet and greet.
Oh, the shadow cabinet.
Yeah, this is Rachel Reeves coming up in a moment, so the shadow cabinet as well, Barry. And, of course, you should have been there, but you very kindly have stayed with us to actually steer us through these historic scenes. Former leader of the Tory party, former Prime Minister Theresa May, very animated. Liz Truss, another former Prime Minister, of course, who has been reflecting on her time in power. So we are seeing lots and lots of handshakes and not just applause, but whoops of support as well in the hall there.
Yes, absolutely. No, there's huge support, clearly, from Parliament.
So Roger Gale, who I think is the father of the House, I'm correct in saying?
No,
he's not.
But he's actually Deputy
And there's
Speaker
Boris. There's Boris Johnson. We can't quite lip read to see what's being said, but a smile and a pat on the back. So, as we say, we have Ukrainian MP Sviatoslav Jurash with us following these historic scenes. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on this day. What do you think your countrymen and women will be making of these scenes?
Thank you very much. The reality is the link between our two nations has never been stronger. UK has been foremost in gathering the world together in support of Ukraine. We faced the gravest odds on the 24th of February. You remember that the very many world's analysts and intelligence services were predicting the capital of our country would take over several days, and the entire conflict wrapped up in several weeks. It's now a year on, and we are pushing back the Russian forces, both in the north, around our capital, in the east, in the south, and we are beating back the second biggest army in the world, showing that nation determined to keep its independence will do so. And that will be impossible without the British help and without British support. So yes, this visit solidifies that, hopefully for all time.
And the language being used and the historical references, very interesting, where he talked about being in Churchill's war rooms, the cabinet rooms, sitting in his armchair and realising what that lesson of history was.
Indeed, Britain faced the gravest odds at that point, alone against the rapacious Germany, which was destroying the entirety of the world as we knew it, and in coalition with the Soviet Union, basically threatening British existence. And the fact of the matter is that you were able to beat back those odds. And when you face those kinds of challenges in your own nation, you want to learn from lessons that have been from people that have been there before and were victorious.
And an oblique reference then, of course, to the Battle of Britain, the pilots that saved the UK at that time. And President Zelenskyy informing us that the script on the side of that helmet that he gave to Lindsay Hoyle, we have freedom, give us the wings to protect it. Clearly this direct appeal for advanced fighter jets to help you in your defence.
Indeed, the Russian forces made their very best efforts to destroy our air force in the beginning of the conflict. They were unable to, and we have not allowed them the freedom of movement in the skies throughout this conflict. And the fact of the matter is that we want to keep them away from controlling our skies, and for that we need support in the air.
Is there, however, an acknowledgement there in Ukraine about the difficulty that we heard, obviously, President Biden saying no, that there is the fear that this will be interpreted by the Kremlin as an offensive move once these aircraft are supplied?
Kremlin has spelled many threats both to the West, to Ukraine, and to the world, and has at every single point shown that, as one of the British foreign policy experts said about other country, their appetite is so big, but their teeth are so bad. And the reality is the Russian ability to project that power is not matched to the capabilities of the West in any regard.
Interesting point. And just a final thought, Sviatoslav. What about the encouragement, perhaps, is the word that this will give to your countrymen and women, knowing that you are not alone, that there is this link to others in Europe?
It was fundamental in the very first points, and when the war just started, having that immediate British connection, having that support, having those in-loves that I saw deployed around our capital, defending our capital, destroying Russian armor, which was swooping in to take over our country. It was fundamental to give us hope that we will live on to another day, and we did. And again, for that, we will be eternally grateful to the British nation, which was there in the time of gravest need, remembering as it was in time of gravest need. And again, when we'll be victorious, Britain will be first in that table.
Sviatoslav Jurash, thank you very much indeed for your words and joining us here on GB News. And of course, we wish you well. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get more reaction now with Catherine. Catherine's been outside Westminster Palace there for us as that meeting of MPs came together to listen to those words from President Zelenskyy. I mean, heavy with history, Catherine, in terms of the references and the language that President Zelenskyy was using.
Yes, it's quite something, isn't it, to watch history being made as we just have the sun streaming in from behind the windows onto Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And he spoke for about half an hour, a very uplifting, quite emotive speech. And he really is extremely skilled at this, isn't he? I think his actor training, he used to be an actor, used to be a comedian. He knows how to write, he knows how to deliver a speech, he knows how to get his message across. Of course, he was sporting his trademark khaki sweatshirt that he seems to have been wearing, something like that, since the very beginning of the conflict. And it really went down incredibly well with MPs in the hall. But the central message, of course, first of all, absolutely, thank you to Britain, thank you for standing by us from the beginning and leading the world in the response to Ukraine. And then with that, of course, we're the first country supplying the modern tanks. Now he needs the planes, he wants the planes, and he's very clever how he ties it in. So he talked about having delicious tea that was greeted with lots of laughter early on in the speech, and then later on towards the end he cycled back to that and he talked again about delicious English tea, and then mentioned English planes and said they need modern planes, talked about the King, said it was a particular honour that he was going to meet the King shortly, said he's an Air Force pilot. And in Ukraine today, every Air Force pilot is a king. That was greeted with huge applause. And then, of course, he went shaking hands. He paid tribute in particular to Boris Johnson. They've obviously got a very firm friendship, and he will be relieved that Rishi Sunak has clearly pledged to continue leading the West in support for Ukraine. And so I think he's come here partly because we are so important, but partly because we led at the beginning, we've led with the tanks, and now they are hoping that we may lead with the planes. If they can get us to say, OK, we're going to send some planes, possibly the Americans might follow, the Germans might follow, etc. So he's obviously come here with a wish list, and well, let's see what happens now.
Yeah, and of course we should reflect they are American planes, of course, aren't they, the F-16s, but we have got the confirmation that we are going to be training Ukrainian pilots in the use of those fast NATO jets.
Yeah, so that is a shift, isn't it? Because he's been asking for planes for a while, basically, as soon as he'd got the West to give way on tanks, which took quite a struggle. And of course, we did a few weeks ago say we'll just send these dozen or so Challenger 2 tanks. Yeah. Then that unlocked America said they would send, and now he's moved on to planes. OK, so we're not saying we will send the planes, although Boris Johnson has called for that, but of course it's no longer Boris Johnson's call, he's not Prime Minister. But the fact that we are now training Ukrainian pilots certainly suggests a move in that direction. And Rishi Sunak has said they're hoping to train 20,000 Ukrainian troops this year, including Marines, including pilots. So a big step up from last year where we trained 10,000.
Catherine at Westminster, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's now speak to a former senior military intelligence officer and NATO planner, Philip Ingram, joins us once more. Philip, direct question to you. Do you think Zelenskyy will get his F-16s?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily F-16s. I think he will get aircraft because that's the next logical step. We keep talking F-16s, but whether it's Eurofighters, whether it's Saab, whether it's Rafale, whether it's Tornadoes, there are a number of different options there. So I think President Biden has been very clear when he said the US won't give F-16s, but he didn't say they wouldn't give other aircraft or help other aircraft get in there. The Dutch have said they might give F-16s, but it's getting him those aircraft that he needs to give that military effect that he needs on the ground.
Yeah, and of course they've got to be maintained and the pilots have got to be able to fly them. But I think I'm right in saying there are F-16s already in Poland, obviously near the border there. So they are pretty near if needs be.
Well, there are, but getting modern fighter aircraft into Ukraine is not difficult whatsoever, and it's not just learning how to fly them; it's learning how to fight them. That's the difficult bit. It's relatively straightforward to train a pilot to move from one airframe to another, even if it is a much more sophisticated airframe. But it's to be able to fight that with all the systems on board, and that is something that takes months, if not years, to practice properly. And therefore, it's important to get a balance of understanding what's the right aircraft with the right weapon systems on it. So what you're not going to do is provide the Ukrainians with something that is so powerful and so good that actually, when it comes into the heat of battle, they can't use it properly.
Yeah, because one imagines the avionics on an F-35, for instance. You probably need a manual that goes to several volumes just to get through it all.
It's not just the avionics; it's the different weapon systems that are on there as well. So it's those that will shoot the Russian aircraft on it, those that will attack the ground. Each one has got different characteristics. They all need different training to be able to use them, and they all need different levels of support. So it's a very, very complex issue.
You said something quite interesting, shoot Russian planes down. I mean, presumably that would be on the Rubicon, or what would be the role of these aircraft? Would it actually be to deter Russia from further aerial assaults, or would it be literally to take on any aircraft and other things that come across the border?
Well, now that we've said that we're going to give tanks and infantry fighting vehicles to the Ukrainians, that gives them the ground capability to provide a punch through the Russian defences in a way that needs to be there. But from a military perspective, whenever you're putting that sort of armoured punch together, what you want to create is a thing called local air superiority. At the worst case, where you actually control the airspace above where that punch is going in, so that any enemy aircraft can't come and attack the tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. To do that, Ukrainians need these aircraft, and to make sure that punch works and works well and isn't going to be interdicted by Russian Air Force, you need to provide that air cover, and that means the ability to shoot down Russian aircraft, both from ground-based air defense systems, which can be moved forward, but also from the fighters and fighter bombers that are been able to operate much further out to deter and then, if necessary, interdict Russian aircraft.
So effectively a no-fly zone, as of course we remember in the Balkans the importance of trying to establish that. Yeah, Philip, thank you very much indeed for your time once more. Thanks for joining us on GB News. Well, let's just reflect now the aftermath of the earthquakes still hitting Turkey and Syria as the rescue efforts continue. The official death toll now rising to more than 11,000, but thousands more still trapped in the collapsed buildings. And, of course, these coming hours vital to try and get to those people. Well, President Erdogan of Turkey has been visiting the quake sites, acknowledging, indeed, the problems with the response to the earthquake. Turkey's disaster management agency saying 38,000 people injured in Turkey alone so far. That's without, of course, all those in the north of Syria. And still stories of hope, however, people being found. This video, a little girl being rescued in Turkey, and they managed to extricate her from the concrete and the steel and so on of these collapsed buildings. Meanwhile, Turkish and Syrian communities in the UK raising hundreds of thousands of pounds for the earthquake appeal, collection points for donations set up nationally, especially in North London, where, of course, Enfield in particular, where most of the UK's Turkish population is based. Let's go to the British Alevi Federation with our reporter Ray Addison, who's there for us. And Ray, we had actually at Prime Minister's Questions the intervention of Ferial Clark, the MP for Enfield, of Turkish origin herself, saying how important this effort would be.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. The Turkish community here in London is really swinging into action. You mentioned the British Alevi Federation. That's where I am now. They've got 8 outlets all around the United Kingdom, and we're seeing very similar response to this disaster in Turkey and Syria. They're collecting as much aid as they can and shipping it over to where it's needed the most. I'm joined now by Israfil Erbil. He's the former chair of the British Alevi Federation. Sir, tell us, how have people been impacted personally here?
It's essentially the disaster we're faced. We all have family members, relatives, neighbours and people we know affected in Turkey. So people in UK, they're all affected directly.
I can see the response that's taking place here. We've got boxes and boxes of aid, and members of the Federation now are sorting through it to send the most vital items where it's needed the most. Also, members are travelling over to Turkey tonight.
We have 5 members travelling out tonight. They are taking as much aid they can with them. But here we are collecting blankets and some very vital items. So it's very cold. The earthquake hit and then cold, -10, -7 in those areas. People are dying in cold now as well. So we're trying to help in any way we can.
We saw earlier images of the President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, visiting the disaster zone. And do you feel like the government response has been enough and fast enough in Turkey?
It was too late. It was too late. And still, there are a lot of buildings, rubbles, nobody has touched. So we know we have people speaking direct, and it's very late.
Israfil Erbil, thank you very much for joining us. The group here, the Federation, asking for essential donations. They're looking for things like hot water flasks, hygiene products as well, flashlights, power banks, heat packs and sleeping bags, and you can bring them here to the Alevi Cultural Centre in Enfield.
Yeah, and Ray, an interesting point you touched on. Clearly they need things that can be useful, rather than people just bringing stuff without checking with them first. So I guess there is a list of those absolutely important items they need.
That's absolutely right, Mark. People have very generously been offering things like shoes and clothes. That's not what they're after. They're after items that could really help to keep people warm, like the sleeping bags, like the power banks, to sort of keep them able to communicate with their friends and family. They're sending mobile phones, lots and lots of vital items.
Ray, thank you for updating us on that, and thank you here in the studio to our panel, Benedict Spence and Barry Gardner, who've been witnessing this historic occasion of President Zelensky's address to the Parliament at Westminster Hall, indeed. He's now on his way to Buckingham Palace to meet the King. We'll have that for you live in this coming hour. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 2 o'clock and you're back with GB News Live. And of course, we've been hearing President Zelenskyy in this historic address at Westminster to the MPs of Westminster Hall. He is now on his way to meet the King at Buckingham Palace. And our royal reporter, Cameron, is there for us. And Cameron, of course, we had the reference to the King in that parliamentary address, the fact that King Charles has got his RAF wings, and saying that in Ukraine, of course, every pilot was a king in terms of defending Ukrainians from the Russian advance.
Yes, he was, Mark. He spoke at length, actually, about His Majesty the King. He also talked about the gratitude he has for the King for the support he showed to Ukraine when he was Prince of Wales. If you remember, he talked about Russia's brutal aggression following the invasion of Ukraine almost a year ago now. He also said during his speech, President Zelenskyy in Westminster Hall, just under an hour ago, really, he said it was an honour and a truly special moment for me and my country to be invited to Buckingham Palace to meet His Majesty the King. His Majesty has been in East London this morning visiting, having a couple of engagements in London. We assuming he is back at Buckingham Palace now if President Zelenskyy is on his way to the palace. But the then Prince of Wales, now King, has always shown kind of historical support for Ukraine following the annexation of Crimea back in 2014. The then Prince of Wales, the King Charles, he talked about, he reportedly compared President Putin to Hitler during a private conversation with a member of the public he was speaking to. A spokesman for the King back then did say that he would not seek to make a public political statement during a private conversation. Then, of course, since the invasion of Ukraine, the King Charles and Queen Camilla have shown their public support for Ukraine and President Zelenskyy. They very quickly, actually, following the invasion, visited the Ukrainian Orthodox Church here in London. And if you remember, the King spoke about the truly terrible aggression, again, of Putin. That is a quote from the then Prince of Wales. Camilla was actually also seen in tears at one point, having heard the plight of many Ukrainians who had come over to Britain as refugees. They also visited the Ukrainian community in Ottawa during the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee tour that they both went on back in May 2022. The now Prince and Princess of Wales, other members of the royal family, William and Catherine, when they were the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, again, that was something that President Zelenskyy mentioned during his speech in Westminster Hall. They actually released a statement following the invasion of Ukraine They said during the meeting in 2020 that they had with President Zelenskyy before the Russian invasion, they said they learnt of their hope and optimism for Ukraine's future. And then Will and Kate went on to say, today we stand with the President and all of Ukraine's people as they bravely fight for that future. Now, clearly now that Charles is king, it is a very fine line in terms of becoming too political. I doubt very much that we're going to get such strongly worded statements as we did when he was Prince of Wales, talking about that terrible aggression, etc. But I think that power of soft diplomacy and, in fact, just seeing a photograph of His Majesty the King and President Volodymyr Zelenskyy inside Buckingham Palace, two heads of state, I think is going to be pretty powerful indeed. So, as you said, Mark, we are waiting for President Zelenskyy to arrive here at Buckingham Palace for an audience with His Majesty King Charles III.
Yeah, we can see some police in the distance there getting into position, so that might be imminent. I mean, as you say, obviously the king has to be above politics, but given the tenor of the speech that we heard in Westminster with the lessons of history, the fact that Zelenskyy sat in Churchill's armchair, this is something that King Charles, of course, is very close to in terms of Britain's place in Europe and history.
He certainly is. He'll be well aware of the history when it comes to the royal family's support during World War II. His grandfather, King George VI, made a number of speeches during that time, many of which were made actually in Buckingham Palace about Britain's fight for freedom in Europe. As I mentioned, when he was Prince of Wales, he took a very firm stance on showing his public support for Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and also calling out what he calls Russia's brutal aggression. I think the meeting here is going to be something that the king was very much wanting to do. And President Zelenskyy mentioned in the speech what he intends to talk to the king about. He spoke that the king himself has his RAF wings. Of course, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, we know, wants the West to send fighter jets to aid in that war in Ukraine. And he said that Ukrainian pilots are in themselves kings, that Ukraine pilots are kings themselves. In terms of what's said in the meeting, I don't think we're going to get any official lines as to exactly what the King and President Zelenskyy discussed. It is a private meeting, we've been told by Buckingham Palace. I would expect getting perhaps a little bit of footage or pictures at the beginning of that meeting, but I suspect, as is custom with meetings with other heads of state, the camera will be very much shut off. But I think we'll have to wait and see if we get anything from President Zelensky's side in terms of exactly what is said in the meeting by either the President of Ukraine or King Charles III. I think Buckingham Palace will want this to remain a private meeting.
Yeah, but of course, President Zelenskyy already reflecting that Prince Charles, of course, has got his RAF wings, a fast jet pilot in his training at Cranwell all those years ago. But back to you, of course, as we see the motorcade approach. Cameron, for the moment, thank you. But let's head back now to Westminster. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, waiting for us. And Darren, what an occasion with, as we were saying, with Cameron, these lessons of history that Zelenskyy was pointing out all the time, and this very vivid image of him sitting in Churchill's armchair in the cabinet war rooms.
Yeah, quite the moment to be actually in Westminster Hall, Mark, listening to that speech alongside my lobby colleagues, but obviously members from across both the House of Commons and the House of Lords and parliamentary staff as well. The hall itself was rammed. Clearly, President Zelenskyy received rapturous rounds of applause, not just before and after that speech, but constantly throughout that speech, talking and praising Britain's role right from the start. Before this war began, in fact, Britain supplying training and weapons. A personal thanks to Rishi Sunak, but also to the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who was in the audience watching that speech as well. Now, at the moment, President Zelenskyy is meeting with the Speaker in his residence in Parliament. He's then going to travel, as you've been speaking to Cameron, to Buckingham Palace for that meeting with the King. I think what was notable in the speech, punctuated by moments of humour, but also moments of gratitude, but of appeal too, in which he talked about, didn't he, how he repeatedly mentioned that Ukraine does need more help, and that includes the need for fighter jets. Now, it's quite significant today that the UK government have announced that they're prepared to train Ukrainian fighter pilots in standard-made NATO jets. That is a pretty significant move, I would suggest, by the UK government, certainly something that has not been offered by any other NATO country. But today, President Zelenskyy, speaking to MPs, said that he wanted combat aircraft for Ukraine, wings for freedom, he branded them, i.e. what he was trying to say, Mark, is, yes, very well and good that you're now willing to go as far as training our pilots, but what we ultimately need are those jets.
Presented that Ukrainian helmet, the pilot's helmet, to Sir Lindsay Hoyle, and indicating that the words on the side were, as you say, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it." I mean, quite a clever move in terms of that sort of stage that he had to present the world with this issue.
Yeah, indeed. And he brought it up time and time again, not just with that helmet that was presented in Westminster Hall, but also clearly with a reference, and we talked to Cameron as well about it, in regards to King Charles as well and his role in all of that. So, yes, I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a symbolic visit by President Zelenskyy, but it's more than just symbolism. This is an attempt to try and eke out more from Britain, if you like, in terms of military support, which has come, because not only are we seeing that delivery of training on not just tanks, but now jets from the UK, but also more long-range missiles as well. We know that his visits to the United States, President Zelensky's visit to the United States, was pretty successful in that the United States have handed over, or will do, some of their Abraham tanks in the months to come. The UK, of course, sending some of its Challenger tanks, and we know that European countries will be sending theirs as well. But clearly, always for Kyiv, the argument comes that they need and want more. And that is a case I'm sure we're going to hear later on this afternoon when President Zelenskyy joins the Prime Minister, meeting some of those British troops, and indeed Ukrainian soldiers that are here being trained by the British military. Just to give you a sense of the choreography, he was in Downing Street this morning. The Prime Minister met him at the airport. They then had a brief conversation before he travelled to Parliament to make that speech at Westminster Hall. He's now meeting with the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, will travel to Buckingham Palace, but then this afternoon he's going to go out of London to meet some of those British troops and to say some of the Ukrainians that are here being trained, and that we're expecting also a press conference between both the President and the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Darren, we're just...
so a jam-packed day.
Darren, just to interrupt, we're just seeing the motorcade now heading down the Mall towards Buckingham Palace, with all the outriders as well for this meeting with the King. And, of course, as you say, it's not just meeting the soldiers, but he'll be seeing some of the hardware as well. It is a pretty substantive shopping list, isn't it? As well as the tanks, self-propelled guns, armoured vehicles, precision-guided missiles and so on. Britain's putting its mouth where its money is. Or rather the other way around,
yeah, indeed, particularly with these long-range missiles as well. In the sense that, Mark, there's been a big argument, and it's a constant argument. It's an argument we had a month or so ago about the use and supply of tanks, not necessarily within this country, but certainly within other NATO allies, particularly Germany, but to a degree inside the United States and France and elsewhere as well, about just how far is NATO prepared to go in terms of supplying military hardware to Ukraine. There's always a fear that some of these long-range missiles may land in Russia or could be escalated to do so. That clearly would be a big concern with the supply of jets, fighter jets as well. And as I say, well, there is political unity to a large degree here, and a desire, I think, across the political spectrum to provide more military hardware. That's not been the case elsewhere, with real concerns about an all-out war with Russia. And so, to a degree, Britain is leading in all of this. That's what I'm saying. Like they were one of the first countries in the world to supply these weapons before the invasion of last year. One of the first countries, along with the United States, to warn that an invasion was on its way. Have been ahead of the game in terms of tanks and other military equipment. And maybe it is a sense that actually we are still continue to go down that path with the training of these fighter pilots. But also today was a sense, we got this in Westminster Hall, about trying to send a sense of unity. We saw the PMQs as well from Keir Starmer. The Britain Parliament MPs, members of the House of Lords, are at this moment in time squarely behind President Zelenskyy and indeed the Ukrainian people.
Final thought, though, Darren, should we ask the question that when we've had questions about what they call the hollowing out of Britain's defence forces, have we got enough kit to supply Ukraine and keep our own borders secure, of course, with suggestions that, you know, we haven't got enough ammunition to actually get some kind of defence going if things go to the worst?
Yeah, that is an argument, and in fact I was at a RUSI event last night here in central London, attended by a speech by the Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey, making that point that actually we, not weirdly but surprisingly maybe in some ways, both Labour and Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, seem to be on the same page, i.e. that the defence forces in this country do need more help, do need frankly more money. At the same time, Labour, and it seems that the government aren't necessarily able to confirm where that money may well come from. But yes, it will be a debate, I think, Mark, about the supply of weapons. We know, as Ben Wallace has stated, that defence spending has not kept a pace with the need he and others.
Darren, apologies, I'm just going to interrupt you again because we've just got some more pictures coming from the Mall. This is the King arriving, we believe, with the Queen Consort. So President Zelenskyy has actually beaten him to it with that short trip from Parliament. As Cameron was telling us, the King and Queen Consort in East London earlier at an event, but there is the Royal Motorcade arriving there at Buckingham Palace, so we expect that meeting to get underway fairly quickly. Apologies for interrupting you, Darren. You were just indicating that RUSI, they were actually reflecting on Ben Wallace's position as Defence Secretary and exactly what Britain can actually provide for its own defence as well as to Ukraine.
Yeah, indeed, and you know there is an essence now where Britain is not directly involved in any conflict around the world, but we do not know where the pressures are going to come from. You know, there are British troops based still in the Baltic states, in Estonia. In fact, I was visiting one of the bases only a couple of months ago before Christmas with the Prime Minister. But there are real concerns clearly about China's ambitions in the South China Sea. We know the Navy deployed some assets there. There's been a retreat by the French in Mali and in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where many would argue British troops need to be, in essence, to try and ward off Islamist extremism. And yet the UK is not involved in lots of this stuff because, as you say, it simply does not have the capability of being in different planes in different parts of the world. Now, there are some who will argue, and of course always argue, for higher defence spending. We know that Boris Johnson had committed the government to reaching 2.5% of GDP spending by the middle of this decade. Liz Truss wanted to go further and say 3% by the end, by 2030. The UK government to date have held that to that 2.5% commitment, but it's uncertain how far that will go in the future.
Darren at Westminster, thank you very much indeed for that. As we say, the President to meet the King at Buckingham Palace, both having arrived there now. But let's get now the thoughts of Chris Parry. As Darren exits stage left, former Rear Admiral in the Royal Navy and indeed NATO commander. And Chris, just to pick up on what Darren was talking about there, I mean, there are questions about, you know, our ability perhaps long term to keep supplying Ukraine with this sort of level of armament and equipment.
Yeah, I think the broad shape of British armed forces are OK. The thing is, they're geared for deterrence at the moment, not for defeating an enemy of similar proportions. We call it sort of a peer enemy. And I think we've got to understand that there's a considerable difference between deterring opponents and defending your country or NATO territory against it. And currently, neither our defence base or indeed our industrial capacity is up to defending another country. And that's where the shortfall lies.
How does the call from President Zelenskyy at Westminster, your powerful English planes, as he described them, how does that fit into this sort of jigsaw? I mean, we assume that perhaps the Typhoons are perhaps a little too advanced, even if we're training these Ukrainian pilots at the moment. And a lot of the talks have been about American F-16s, for instance.
Yes, I think the speech, with all the allusions to 1940 with Churchill, he didn't actually mention the Battle of Britain, but he could have done. You know, the first of the few and all that sort of thing. We can't really offer him any Typhoons or F-35s. I mean, they're too advanced to get in the fight early enough. That's the first thing. And the Ukrainian pilots, frankly, would take a while to get used to them, and it might be too late. So what he's appealing for really is our lobbying, I think, and our influence to get other countries to release, as you say, F-16s, perhaps Mirage from French sources or other countries that have Mirage, and more particularly, I think, the sort of Swedish aircraft like the Viggen. Those are the sort of aircraft that will complement very much what the Ukrainians are used to.
Right.
So, I think that's what he's doing. He's trying to get us to influence other people. And I think unless they do get those aircraft, they're going to be hard put to it when the Russian offensive comes shortly.
And what do you make of, if you like, the mood music, the fact that Rishi Sunak has announced that we are training these pilots? I mean, is that perhaps nudging these other European nations to coming up with the hardware, the aircraft as such?
Yeah, I hope so. And I think that was the intention. We're not just training their pilots, of course. We're training their tank people, their artillery and missile operators, and I think other sort of operations that we could term as deep strike into those areas that are occupied by the Russians at the moment. So they'll really hurt if they move ahead with an offensive within the next week to 10 days or so. That's the Russians, that is. I think what we need to bear in mind is, the Ukrainians are going to be hard put to it. And I think he needs all the support he can get, not just from Britain and from everyone else. What I found striking about his speech is it took a foreign president to make Britain feel good about itself.
That Churchill spirit being re-engendered with the reflections about sitting in the armchair, of course, in the cabinet war rooms. However, let's just ask, what are you hearing on the ground, on the grapevine, about what the Russians might be preparing and what their capability will be now in this spring offensive, if or when it occurs?
Yeah, it's a good question. They've been preparing over the winter months. They've been probing Ukrainian defences, mostly in Donetsk and Luhansk. There's been talk of a multi-front attack. That's basically coming out of the Donetsk region in the southeast. I suspect there'll be either a feint attack or an associated attack coming out of Crimea towards Odessa, and maybe even another strike from Belarus on Kiev or the areas to the west, so they can cut off some of the supplies of Western aid. All those options are open to the Russians right now. They will have learnt lessons from all their mistakes from last year. And the one thing we know from history is the Russians do learn from their mistakes. And I'm afraid to say they'll do what they did in World War II. As Marshal Zhukov said, they'll throw corpses at it. They don't care how many people they lose. They will keep throwing people at it until they can prevail. And we've got to bear in mind, the Ukrainians can't afford to trade, dead for dead in this situation.
Yeah, so not just the capabilities, but the mindset as well, which is an interesting point. Chris, as ever, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News and bringing us your view. Thank you. Well, coming up here on GB News Live, the latest on the earthquake in southeast Turkey and the north of Syria and the attempts being made to help a British team out there already. We'll be speaking to a journalist whose mother's trying to flee the devastation of Gaziantep. All that coming up, but let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Fog clearing across central and southern parts of the UK during the rest of the morning, and then dry for many into the afternoon, but it will turn increasingly wet and windy in the north. Now, you can see the contrast across the UK. High pressure close to the south, light winds and clear skies, allowing frost and fog to form by dawn this morning. But a weather front moving into northwest Scotland, bringing strengthening winds, gales, 65 to 75 mile per hour gusts for the Outer Hebrides, and some heavy rain for a time during the afternoon. As that's pushing south, it will push cloud into northern England, West Wales, as well as Cornwall, but to the southeast, actually plenty of sunshine once the fog lifts, and temperatures fairly widely across the UK reaching 8 to 10 Celsius. Now, the front across Scotland pushes south through the evening, and it will fall as snow over the higher ground as it clears. Then wintry showers follow for northern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well, snow and hail in places, mainly over the hills. The front weakens, though, as it pushes south. It will prevent a frost in the far south, with some drizzle to begin things on Thursday. Otherwise, for North Wales, Northern England, southern Scotland, frosty conditions and bright skies. But for Northern Ireland, as well as for much of the rest of Scotland, we've got those showers continuing to pile in. A gusty wind as well for the far north. The rain and the drizzle and the low cloud clears quite quickly during the morning in the south, and then sunny skies once again, 8 to 10 Celsius across much of England and Wales. Feeling colder though for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with those blustery showers moving through. The showers do tend to ease into Thursday evening. We'll see a lot of cloud arrive into the north and the west from the Atlantic, and that's the start of a milder episode of weather heading into the weekend. Mostly cloudy skies this weekend, but some brightness in the south and temperatures rising for most.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now let's reflect on the Herculean efforts still being made in Turkey and in northern Syria to try to rescue people. Of course, these next hours vital, a golden period when they try to recover people from the wreckage before, obviously, they start to suffer problems. Well, it's still ongoing. The death toll, I'm afraid, now 11,000. And the World Health Organization saying that could rise to 20,000 or more. Thousands of people still trapped in these collapsed buildings, with the efforts being made to carefully sift through these blocks of concrete and steel. But we can see that there are still these wonderful moments where people are being found. This little girl rescued in Turkey and survived incredibly, brought out to safety. Meanwhile, the Turkish and Syrian communities here in the UK raising hundreds of thousands of pounds for the appeal and trying to find out, of course, what's happened to their friends and relative in the various areas. Well, joining us now is Zaina Erhaim, who's a Syrian journalist based in London, whose mother has been trying to flee Gaziantep, and Eliz Özberk, a Turkish student who is in London. Eliz, let's speak to you first of all, because clearly you're trying to establish what's happened to friends and family. What news are you getting?
The news that I'm getting for now, right now, is some of friends and some family members, we can't reach them still. Thankfully, my close family, they're all safe. They're from Istanbul. We're still trying to get some news out of friends from Turkey, but it's been hard to reach to them as well. And yeah, that's all I can say basically for now.
Yeah, of course, communication is so difficult. Well, look, we've got a live picture now on the screen of the efforts in Gaziantep, and we've got obviously an important link for you, Zaina, in that we believe your mum's been trying to flee the devastation there. What news have you had from her?
Well, she slept for the last 2 nights in a shelter. Very few things were provided, no running water, no electricity, barely any food. And it's freezing in Gaziantep. It has been snowing for the last couple of days. Luckily, there is connection, and she was privileged to be able to get her phone out of her flat. But, I mean, we were not sure whether she can travel because, in general, Turkey imposed this restriction on Syrian refugees that they need permission to travel within Turkey. So, and I know some Syrians were trying to flee through Adana airport. They were told they cannot without the permission of the governor. I mean, in such situation, who can get the permission to flee an earthquake? So we're just making sure that she can travel, and then I will try just to book her in a hotel in any other safer area.
And you touched on an important issue, of course, of the many Syrian refugees in Turkey and then across the border in northern Syria itself, where I think it's fair to say we don't really know what the true picture is because it's so difficult getting access.
I think the picture is really gloomy, and most of those that I know, or the names that were published, even the death in Antakya, they were Syrians, because I mean those towns in the south were the safe haven for all the Syrians who fled the war in the first time. Yeah. But again, as you said, very few news is coming from Syria because there is nothing going through Syria. As we were speaking, one of the main crossing borders between Syria and Turkey just published that they haven't received not even one aid since the earthquake. There is no equipment. People are begging for trucks because it's 55 hours now and they're losing hope of being able to get their loved ones alive. And there is no equipment, no help, no international, no Red Cross, nothing is getting in at all.
I mean, we are told that, of course, there's the UK-funded group, the White Helmets, but clearly the Syrian authorities, as we understand, are no friends of that particular organisation. Have you heard anything about whether any of the sort of aid efforts have been managing to get to some of these areas?
In terms of the main aid that has been needed through the last 3 days, that's the equipment, the trucks. Certainly nothing was provided. And White Helmets is one of the groups that are working around the hours. But I mean, the destruction is too difficult for a whole country like Turkey that has dealt with such a crisis before to be able to do that. So you can imagine within the Syrian context, 10 years of war, very tired health system and fear of bombing. I mean, yesterday, the regime bombed the rescuers who were working to help those in Mara, in eastern Aleppo.
Elis, we lost the signal to you for a moment. We've got you back, though. I mean, the other issue is, I gather, that the official response in Turkey is being questioned by many, that it seems some areas are getting the relief efforts, others aren't.
Yes, that is definitely correct. The problem that we have right now is the earthquake hit many different cities, and I do believe that we weren't prepared enough. And Turkey has called for international help as well. We do need a lot of help to actually go and help these people and rescue them. And we're, as the Turkish community here and as the Turkish community back home as well, we're trying our best as citizens to either send donations or go to the cities that have been affected ourselves. And yeah, that is definitely correct. We were not prepared at all.
No, and literally people using their hands to try and dig people out, which is a desperate scenes. Well, we wish you and your family well, and also, Zaina, keep us updated on the situation with your mother and whether you can get her to safety. But thank you both for speaking to us here on GB News. Much appreciated. And, of course, we'll keep you updated on the position in Turkey and Syria itself. More coming up shortly. Let's get an update on all the headlines now with Tatiana.
Mark, thank you very much. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The President of Ukraine has arrived at Buckingham Palace, where he's meeting the King following an historic address he made to MPs at Westminster Hall. Volodymyr Zelenskyy was welcomed by the Prime Minister as he touched down in the UK this morning before the pair held a bilateral meeting at Downing Street. It's his first visit to the country since the start of Russia's invasion. In a speech to Parliament, Mr Zelenskyy thanked the British people for their ongoing support. He spoke of the last time he visited the UK and was invited to sit in Winston Churchill's chair at the War Rooms.
The guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Governments and organisations around the world are offering support to Turkey and Syria after devastating earthquakes have killed more than 11,000 people. 3 British nationals are still missing following the disaster. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit on Monday morning, with a second major quake a few hours later. The government has pledged support to Turkey's president, who's been visiting one of the affected areas. A state of emergency has been declared for 3 months in the 10 worst affected cities. And a 77-strong British search and rescue team are currently assisting in the country. The Home Secretary says the government's anti-terror prevent programme needs a major reform after a review found the programme is not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. Suella Braverman says the government needs to better understand the threats and the ideology underpinning them. The Home Office has accepted all 34 recommendations. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live, and we can update you now on this search for missing mother Nicola Bulley, which is still ongoing in Lancashire. Police, though, continuing to reject any suggestions that she could have been a victim of crime. Well, let's get the latest now with our reporter there, Sophie Reaper, who's been following this story. And Sophie, I understand that Paul Ansell, her partner, has visited the scene there, where, of course, they're still trying to ascertain the sonar picture, if you like, of the river there.
He has indeed been here this morning. He visited the site where police originally believed Nicola originally went missing from, here at the River Wyre in St Michael's on Wyre in Lancashire. We also know that he spoke with the founder of SGI, who for the last 3 days have been carrying out an independent search of the rivers. When he spoke with Peter Faulding, the founder of SGI, we believe that he spoke with Paul about exactly what their investigation has entailed thus far. I mentioned there that it's the 3rd day that SGI have been helping Lancashire Police in their search for Nicola Bulley, but we heard a little bit earlier on that today will actually be the last day that SGI will be helping with that search. It seems they feel that they've done all they can to help, with Peter Faulding saying, wherever she is, I hope closure comes soon. We also know that the police diving teams have been out here in the river today, but like the SGI team, they unfortunately have been unable to find any answers that may tell us where Nicola Bulley has gone.
And Peter Faulding indicating that one of the issues is that at that spot, the water is really shallow, I think only about 3 feet deep. So therefore, this is the difficulty, trying to work out how or where she might have gone into the river and then been taken away by the tidal surge.
It was, of course, a very difficult situation, and he is an expert in his field. When you look at the bench, there is really no sign of any sign of one way or another. There's no sign that she slipped into the river, but then there's no sign that she was taken. So it is a very difficult thing. And of course, police have encouraged people not to speculate on this because, for one, it doesn't help them with their investigation, but for another, it just generates hope every single time family and friends see these different theories. It just really doesn't help in this situation.
Well, as you say, the official investigation continues, but this search with the sonar boat, the last day today, but clearly we'll be back to you as we get more developments. But for the moment, Sophie, thanks very much for updating us there on the riverbank. Now, let's bring you some breaking news we're getting concerning a former MP, Jared O'Mara, the former MP for Sheffield Hallam, who's been found guilty at Leeds Crown Court of 6 counts of fraud over expense claims while he was in office. It's alleged at court that he was funding a cocaine problem, or at least a drugs problem, but 2 other charges not proven, but 6 in terms of the expenses claims proven in court. We'll have more reaction to that as it comes through. Now, to the United States, where the message came over loud and clear. America first, foreign policy last, it seems. President Joe Biden delivering a combative State of the Union speech at a pivotal moment, of course, in his presidency. He promised, though, to get the job done on the economy and also pledged to fight for police reform and new gun control legislation, although perhaps little chance of those becoming law. Well, President Biden is poised to launch a re-election campaign and, of course, take on the Republicans, who are controlling now one of the chambers of Congress for the first time. Let's speak now to Marco Vincenzino once more, who's been following events from Washington, D.C., and also Susan Platt, former Chief of Staff, indeed, to Joe Biden. Susan, your thoughts, first of all, perhaps a side of Joe Biden that people hadn't seen before. He was really coming out swinging, as they say.
Well, you saw real Joe Biden last night, really going at it, full of energy, full of optimism, full of charisma, full of ideas, asking the American people to help him finish the job, which he started 2 years ago. You know, America and the world are coming out of a big crisis with COVID. We're just starting to get moving. A lot of these things that the Congress passed last year are just going into effect this year. We're rebuilding roads, we're rebuilding tunnels, we're lowering prices for drugs. And it's amazing to me that we created 12 million new jobs, and the Republicans don't seem to want to acknowledge that. But let's see where we go.
Yeah, but an acknowledgement perhaps that the economy is still the problem. And of course, we remember that mantra of a previous president, it is the economy, stupid.
Well, it is, but the economy is getting better. Inflation has come down. This president has paid down $1.7 trillion on the debt, and unemployment is at 3.4%. So we're working at it. We're getting there.
OK, well, let's bring in Marco. I mean, could this be the start of a presidential bid? I mean, is that really perhaps under consideration given his age?
I think the State of the Union marks the unofficial start of Biden's 2024 presidential campaign. The official launch will come soon in the next few weeks. But he's preparing the ground, and the speech last night was actually an attempt to do so. Basically, on the foreign policy front, that's one of the few. China is one of the few issues that can get bipartisan support. So I think on that front, there's very much continuity from the Trump administration, generally speaking. Also, on the Ukraine war, he's claiming credit on having assembled a coalition and keeping the alliance together. Now, his greatest challenge in 2024 is going to keep that alliance intact. The worst of the war in Ukraine is yet to come. On the economics front, he can tout the high jobs numbers, but there's the persistent inflation. Inflation will remain fairly high for the next year at least. If the inflation can go lower to where he wants to get it in the first quarter of 2024, he'll be in a much better position economically where he is now.
Okay.
But the thing is that the economy remains very volatile, and there's a lot of conflicting numbers. It's very unpredictable at present. Another thing is immigration. Immigration wasn't mentioned last night, but that does remain an Achilles heel for him. And also there's a fact about his health. The inauguration day in January of 2025, he will be 82 years old. And the campaign process physically and mentally is a very grueling one. And the question is he up to it?
Yeah, and of course, Susan, we reflect on a previous aged president, Reagan, and of course the problems he suffered after office. I mean, is it fair to put someone through this office, given an advanced age and all the pressures that are on them?
Well, his age is his age, but I think you saw last night someone who was full of optimism, full of energy, and full of ideas. And this week, starting today, the president is traveling to Wisconsin. The entire cabinet will be making 30 stops in 20 different states in the next couple of days. I think they're gearing up and they're ready to go, and they're going to surprise some Republicans. I think you have to note the very different picture that Republicans painted last night. Right. It was something out of a Stephen King novel.
Members of Congress? But will he be checking his garage for any more bits of paper that might be lurking under his Corvette?
I think we've been through that, and I think it's a problem, clearly, that both sides have had to deal with in some respects, and it's something we're going to have to address as a country.
OK. And, Marco, the other thought, of course, who might he be up against, particularly if it's a younger Republican contender?
Now, on the Republican side, there's going to be a very competitive race. So far, obviously, Trump has announced very early on, trying to discourage others from doing so. DeSantis hasn't announced yet, but it's more than likely on February 28th, he has his autobiography coming out. And if, you're going to put out an autobiography, that means, you're doing something. Also, you have Nikki Haley, who's making an announcement. Pompeo will be making an announcement. The bottom line is this. If it's a field with several candidates, it's to Trump's advantage because he can lock up at least a 35% vote remains consistent, diehard loyalist. And if he's up against others that are eating into each other's market share, that serves to Trump's advantage. What the Republicans would have to do to stop Trump is what the Democrats did on Super Tuesday in 2020, is basically many candidates dropped their race, backed Biden against Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was on the verge of taking the nomination. He had the biggest chunk. The Republicans are going to have to pull that kind of move if they want to prevent Trump from taking the nomination. It's a long course ahead. Between now and the end of the primaries is a long road. And between now and November 2024 is an even longer road. Right. It's a very volatile and a very unpredictable situation. Uncertainty looms large on all fronts.
OK, and last quick thought on that, Susan. Would Biden want to take on Trump once more?
Oh, I think he'd relish the thought. But I hope for our country, I hope that's not the case.
OK, Susan Platt and Marco Vincenzino, thank you very much for updating us there with perhaps the new US presidential race underway already. Who knows? Thank you very much. So, remember a classic TV comedy, Fawlty Towers. Well, it could be revived after more than 40 years. Comedy gold, of course, but the humour very much of its time. Let's warn you that the original show and the ups and downs of Torquay Hotelier Basil Fawlty and Sybil, well, it may obviously still be funny, but may offend as well. Let's remember what it was like back in the old days.
Yeah, watch! Who's this then? Stuff you, but I'll do the funny more. It I'm trying to cheer her up, you stupid crowd!
We apologise for that language, but of course that was back in the 70s and re-employing the Ministry of Funny Walks to a different effect. Well, this time round, John Cleese, of course, who played Basil, writing and starring alongside his daughter, Camilla Cleese, the pair in charge of a boutique hotel this time. And of course, Basil famously panicking, no, we should mention the war last time. Will he manage to navigate the pitfalls of modern cancel culture, as it's described? Joining us now, comedian Diane Spencer. Diane, could it work this time round?
I think this is a really exciting opportunity. I've met Camilla Cleese, who is a very funny woman. She's a stand-up comedian in her own right. And her working together with her father, who is obviously a comedy legend, I think they could really bring back Fawlty Towers, but sort of give us that idea of what it's like to try and navigate the pitfalls of trying to be kind, trying to be nice all the time. I mean, perhaps they should go with the slogan, don't mention the woke.
Yeah, and of course we've had John Cleese outside his comic persona attacking cancel culture, as he's called it. But one reflects that looking back at Fawlty Towers, it was a combined effort, of course, with Connie Booth. So they wrote it together. Without that element, you know, could it still have that sort of acid edge to it?
Oh my gosh, definitely. I mean, I've seen Camilla do stand-up in the clubs. She was excellent. And I think that she'll be able to bring a really modern flavour to the whole script. And obviously you have, I believe it's Rob Reiner who's producing it.
Right.
And he's produced many comedy hits. I think that it could be a very exciting opportunity. And I think that we'll recognise Basil as he's older, as he's trying to navigate the new cultural landscape. And I think it will connect with a lot of people. I'm hoping it's hysterical.
OK. I mean, it was quite cleverly constructed, of course, when we think of the Major and the way that they turned that to actually sort of look at the whole issue of racism and being out of touch and so on. But then there was the cruelty as well in the way that he was dealing with Manuel. I mean, that really wouldn't work this time round, that sort of thing, would it?
Oh, my word, no. Well, unless they actually make a thing out of it and they have Basil Fawlty hauled in front of an employment tribunal or they have him have to deal with an HR person. There's a lot of comic humour that can be mined in trying to change sort of one paradigm to another.
Yeah, and using him as the focal point. And, of course, we remember that the cast of character actors and comic actors that were on hand as well that filled it out. I mean, presumably everyone would be trying to clamber on board to get a place at the table.
Yeah, I have written several letters to my agent already. Yeah, I think there's going to be quite a long queue. It's going to be so exciting, though. I mean, I know that John Cleese said a while ago, oh, I would never bring it back because we're all too old and we couldn't make it work. But a great idea, and I feel that with the addition of Camilla Cleese, it could really turn into something quite special.
Well, we shall watch and wait, or wait and watch, perhaps that way around. Diane, thank you very much indeed for joining us here at GB News. Thank you for your time. And, of course, you'll be starring on a screen near you elsewhere as well fairly soon. Now, what kind of condition is your street in? Well, one road in Birmingham might just be the worst in Britain, we're told, when it comes to fly tipping, burnt-out cars and potholes. Crawford Street and Saltley area of the city has it all, it seems. We sent our reporter Will Hollis to take a look.
The dreaded pothole, scourge of Britain's streets. Like heads on a hydra, patch one up, another two appear. On National Pothole Day, Mr. Pothole himself, aka Mark, a campaigner, is en route to a stretch of the A5 between Towcester and Milton Keynes that's got his attention.
Potholes on the A5 that weren't necessarily that bad in depth, but it's the large area of loss of the wearing surface that affects your braking and handling, and also the fact that people were damaging their tyres.
Potholes form when heavy traffic breaks up the road. Water fills the cracks, then freezes, causing more damage. Brits report millions of them to councils and highway authorities every year. Mark isn't the only one worried about the A5. So is Ian, a local councillor.
As you can see, there's a pothole there. In fact, there's three there. There's one just about to form there and there.
Broken glass is strewn beside the potholes. Ian says crashes are common here.
It is an undeniable fact that we've had fatal accidents on this road. Whether or not they're connected to potholes, I'm not going to speculate. But it is a fact that they're happening, and we need to try and make this road safer.
Nationally, Northamptonshire isn't the worst place for potholes. Figures from the AA show Northumberland tops the list. Cities like Glasgow and Liverpool are also very bad.
I'm quite sure that it's not unique, but nonetheless, it is one of the main strategic highways, and we have to look after those main arterial routes that are taking traffic to everybody across the country.
National Highways, which covers England, says it's been inspecting the stretch of the A5 near Towcester and is planning resurfacing for next month. In a statement, it added that, "We know that good quality roads are important to the millions of drivers that use our network each day. Safety is also our primary concern, and we set stringent standards for pothole repairs on our roads." On National Pothole Day, Mark says the government needs to rethink how it fixes roads.
The real answer is for government to invest £3 billion a year, every year, on a major annual resurfacing programme for local roads, give back the £400 million cut to road maintenance, and then by 10 years' time we won't be in the situation we are with our roads failing so many potholes.
National Pothole Day sounds like a celebration. It isn't. Blemishing the roads Brits rely on, the misery they cause is what's being remembered. Will Hollis for GB News in Towcester.
They're looking into it, as they say, if you remember that song. Anyway, we'll update you, of course, on Britain's worst roads. And there is a busy road outside Buckingham Palace because we have President Zelenskyy there meeting King Charles following that historic speech to the Palace of Westminster. President Zelenskyy asking us to supply his Air Force with advanced jets. That's it from GB News Live for the moment. But Patrick with you for the rest of the afternoon. Stay with us here on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. The wet and windy weather we've seen across
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.